Melissa Walker could feel the tension thrumming through the chic dining room of Bellamy's before she even stepped onto the floor. Even on a typical night, the restaurant radiated an air of exclusivity that made her straighten her posture and double-check her tidy blonde ponytail. Tonight, however, a hush fell over the space that left her both uneasy and curious. She had worked here for 5 years, serving Chicago's elite, but something about the atmosphere felt different. Usually, her manager Patricia kept a watchful eye on every table, ensuring impeccable service. Tonight, though, Patricia stood rooted near the entrance, occasionally glancing at a corner table where a man spoke tersely into his phone. Next to him sat a young boy, about 12, whose quiet struggle to manage his fork tugged at Melissa's heart. She stepped closer and noticed the boy's hands trembling slightly. He had a condition that seemed to affect his motor skills, and every move appeared like an uphill battle. The father, dressed in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit, barely looked up, thoroughly immersed in his call. Melissa recognized the signs. She had seen wealthy patrons consumed by business deals, oblivious to those around them. Yet, something about this man's tense shoulders suggested more than just a busy schedule. She wondered if he was uncomfortable with how to help his son, or if he simply didn't know where to begin. Without waiting for permission, Melissa approached the table, smile warm but voice gentle. "Hello there," she said, crouching slightly to look the boy in the eye. "Are you doing okay with your meal?" The father glanced up mid-sentence, about to protest, but paused when his gaze caught hers. From behind the phone, his deep blue eyes flashed with both surprise and concern. Melissa guessed he wasn't accustomed to staff interrupting him. He cleared his throat, then gave a brisk nod for her to continue. Carefully, she set down her tray. "Would you like me to help you with that?" she asked the boy, who blinked in relief. "I'm Melissa." The boy nodded, expression brightening in a silent appeal for help. She delicately cut his steak into smaller pieces and, with an unobtrusive hand, guided his fork so he could feed himself more easily. Throughout it all, she offered soft encouragement. The father kept his phone pressed to his ear but was no longer speaking. Instead, he watched in silence, as if seeing a scene he hadn't known was possible. A reflection in the nearby window revealed him studying her. He had a strong, athletic build, but there was a tightness to his jaw that suggested guilt. Melissa sensed how deeply he cared for his son, though perhaps he was at a loss for how to engage. Only when she finished assisting the boy did the man finally end his call. "Thank you," he murmured, voice resonant and low. "Nathan can manage, but it's easier with help." Melissa offered a kind nod, not wanting to overstep boundaries. She recognized that complex mixture of pride and helplessness. Soon after, Patricia called her over, brows pinched with concern. "He's an important client," she whispered. "Just be careful and do your job as instructed." Melissa forced a polite smile, knowing Patricia's sternness came from a desire to maintain the restaurant's reputation. Even so, she couldn't ignore the stirring in her chest when she saw Nathan attempt to eat on his own. The fleeting spark in the boy's eyes reminded her of why she was drawn to caring for others in the first place. Nearby, Daniel, the temperamental head chef, peered out from the kitchen, curiosity piqued by the unusual hush. Meanwhile, Sophia, a friendly co-worker with dark hair and a quick wit, caught Melissa's eye and grinned supportively. Sophia had witnessed Melissa's instinct to help diners in small but meaningful ways for years. Though seldom had the gesture felt so poignant, Bellamy's clientele often brought arrogance along with their appetites. Yet this boy's quiet determination made Melissa want to do more. By the end of the evening, the restaurant's usual hum returned. Nathan's father had left with only a curt nod of thanks, but when Melissa went to clear the table, she found an envelope beneath the neatly stacked plates. Inside were several crisp bills, a tip more than triple her usual take, and a small note scrawled in bold handwriting, "Thank you for treating my son with dignity." Melissa's heart thudded as she read it, suspecting she'd seen the man's face in business magazines or on the news. On her short break, she opened her phone to search his name. Brandon Thornton, CEO of Thornton Pharmaceuticals. Her breath caught in her throat. She recognized the company instantly. They produced the heart medication her grandmother desperately needed. The same medication that soared in price, making it impossible for her grandmother Eleanor to afford the full dosage. Returning to the dining area, Melissa felt the weight of that discovery settle on her. He was the man behind a system that placed profits above patients, a system that threatened her grandmother's life every day. In her hand, she still clutched the generous tip, an unexpected gift from a man she'd never wanted to meet. Yet she couldn't deny the tenderness she'd seen when he gazed at his child. It was that small glimpse of humanity that made her pause. Despite everything, part of her wanted to believe that genuine empathy might still reside within even the most powerful and intimidating individuals. After her late shift, Melissa returned to her modest apartment in Chicago's Pilsen neighborhood, the tip from Brandon Thornton still tucked in her uniform pocket. Her body ached from hours of navigating the restaurant's bustling floor, but her mind churned relentlessly. Flipping on a dim lamp, she spotted her grandmother Eleanor, frail and asleep on the worn-out couch, an unfinished crossword puzzle resting on her lap. A pang of guilt swept over Melissa. She hated leaving Eleanor alone for such long stretches, especially given her heart condition. But with bills piling up, she needed every hour she could get at Bellamy's. Melissa gently took the puzzle and pen from her grandmother's hand, careful not to rouse her. She flicked through the stack of medical bills on the coffee table. At the top of the pile lay the latest invoice from the hospital, stark digits that made her stomach clench. Thornton Pharmaceuticals was printed in bold letters across half the statements. How ironic that the man who could buy an entire wing of that hospital with loose change was the same who left a generous tip after seeing Melissa help his son. Her fatigue momentarily forgotten, Melissa slipped into the cramped kitchen to pour herself a glass of water. She tried to shake off thoughts of Brandon Thornton, but memories of his intense gaze and the gentle way he'd finally looked at Nathan intruded again. There was something there, some unspoken regret, yet how could that same man oversee a company that made life-saving medication impossibly expensive for people like Eleanor? Sleep didn't come easily. She lay in bed, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, remembering the days when her parents were alive. Back then, she'd been an ambitious college student, ready to pursue a career in medicine, but a fatal car accident changed everything. Her parents' sudden passing left Eleanor, an ex-English teacher, both physically and financially dependent on Melissa. By her sophomore year, she'd had no choice but to abandon her studies. Since then, life had been a juggling act of double shifts, caretaker duties, and silent dreams shelved indefinitely. Somewhere along the way, she'd buried her yearning to heal people for a living under the pragmatic need to pay rent and keep Eleanor's medical treatments afloat. The next morning, Eleanor woke early, her soft brown eyes crinkling with concern when she saw Melissa hunched over a cup of coffee. "Did you sleep at all, dear?" she asked, voice shaky but kind. "Not really," Melissa admitted. "We got a stack of bills again, the usual runaround." She hesitated, unsure if she should share the news of meeting Brandon Thornton. Eleanor had read enough to know exactly who he was, the billionaire CEO with a powerful grip on drug pricing. But Melissa decided not to spoil her grandmother's morning. Eleanor had enough to worry about. Despite her worry, she felt a flash of gratitude that, for now, Eleanor was stable. She insisted on making breakfast, though it often meant carefully supervising her grandmother, who insisted she was still spry enough to scramble eggs. With the morning routine complete, Melissa left for her first shift of the day, determined to keep a professional smile plastered on her face, no matter how turbulent her thoughts. Arriving at Bellamy's, she slipped into her uniform and spotted Sophia restocking the bar. "Late night," Sophia teased gently, noticing the circles under Melissa's eyes. "You could say that," Melissa replied, forcing a grin. "I couldn't stop thinking about, that man from last night." Sophia's eyebrows lifted. "The one with the fancy suit and the sweet kid." Melissa nodded. "He left me a note and a huge tip. Turns out he's Brandon Thornton, the CEO of a pharmaceutical giant. The same company whose sky-high prices make my grandmother's medication impossible to afford." Sophia set a glass down carefully. "Wow, that's not just a coincidence, huh? Feels more like a cosmic joke," Melissa said, exhaling slowly. "I just don't get how a father who clearly cares about his son's well-being can also allow predatory pricing." Before they could talk further, Patricia stepped in, her voice clipped. "Melissa, good. We have a full house at lunch. Try not to get too chatty today." "Yes, ma'am," Melissa responded, rolling her shoulders to ease the tension. She knew Patricia was strict because Bellamy's catered to powerful personalities who demanded flawless service. Yet Melissa couldn't help but wonder if Brandon would reappear, strolling in with that guarded expression. Lunch hour passed in a blur of clinking cutlery and hushed conversations. Each time the door swung open, Melissa's heart gave a tiny jolt, as if half expecting to see Nathan's earnest eyes or Brandon's confident stride. But neither arrived. Instead, patrons with less recognizable faces came and went, leaving her to wonder if last night's encounter would remain a one-time event. That evening, she found a moment of respite in the cramped hallway behind the kitchen. Daniel, the temperamental chef, was yelling at a line cook about improperly searing salmon, while servers scurried with plates and trays. Alone for a fleeting instant, Melissa pulled out the slip of paper with Brandon's brief note. "Thank you for treating my son with dignity." Despite the frustration she felt about his role at Thornton Pharmaceuticals, something about his words gave her pause. She tucked the note away, uncertain whether to feel angry or oddly touched. When she clocked out, Melissa headed home, dreading the next wave of bills. Still, a spark of curiosity nagged at her. She couldn't help but think she'd glimpsed two completely different worlds. The father who loved his child, yet was tied to a corporate machine, and her own reality, where every dollar counted in the fight to keep her beloved grandmother alive. Those worlds had briefly collided, and she felt sure it wouldn't be the last time. 3 days later, the dining room at Bellamy's was unusually quiet, with just a few scattered patrons enjoying early dinners. Melissa was grateful for the slower pace, which gave her a moment to catch her breath and wipe down the polished wooden tables at her leisure. Her thoughts drifted to Eleanor's medical appointment that morning. The insurance company had sent yet another denial letter for the next recommended heart medication. The cost soared far beyond Melissa's means, and she was running out of options. Halfway through tidying, she glimpsed a familiar figure at the entrance. Brandon Thornton stepped in, phone in hand, and behind him was Nathan, seated in a sleek, custom wheelchair that was clearly designed for both comfort and mobility. Melissa's pulse quickened. She didn't expect him to return so soon, certainly not in the middle of a slow weekday shift. A swirl of emotions tightened in her chest. Admiration for his fatherly presence, frustration over his corporate identity, and an inexplicable longing to say something meaningful. Patricia, ever watchful, approached first. "Good evening, Mr. Thornton, Mr. Nathan," she said with the heightened politeness she reserved for VIPs. "Will the usual table suffice?" "Thank you," Brandon replied curtly, his gaze darting briefly toward Melissa before returning to Patricia. He guided Nathan to the same corner table as before. The boy gave a small smile, clearly remembering the soft-spoken waitress who had helped him. Brandon, however, kept his distance, as if unsure whether to acknowledge Melissa beyond a nod. Sophia nudged Melissa. "You want to take that table?" she whispered. Melissa hesitated. "Honestly, I'm torn," she admitted. "The man is basically responsible for my grandmother not getting her medication." Sophia shrugged. "He might not be personally signing off on those price increases, but it's his company, right?" "That's what I keep telling myself," Melissa said. "But then I see how he looks at his son. There's genuine care there." With a small sigh, Melissa grabbed her notepad. Patricia would insist anyway. Brandon Thornton was considered the top client, and it wouldn't do to offend him by switching servers. She approached the table, adopting her usual friendly demeanor. "Oh, good evening," she said softly. "May I get you anything to start?" Nathan's face lit up. "You're Melissa, right? Dad, this is the waitress I told you about." Brandon managed a constrained smile. "Yes, I remember." He tapped a finger on his phone, as if anticipating another call. "We'll take water to start, and the house bread, please." Melissa placed 2 glasses of water and a bread basket down. She noticed Nathan trying to reposition his fork with difficulty. Brandon was caught between wanting to help his son and wanting to appear calm. The father in him was there, but so was the high-powered CEO who seldom asked for assistance. Throughout the meal, Melissa watched from a distance, stepping in only when needed. Nathan glanced at her hopefully from time to time, as if waiting for her to offer help or conversation. Near the end of their meal, the boy cleared his throat. "Dad," he said, voice wavering with a mixture of shyness and determination. "Melissa knows a lot about how to help. She showed me last time." Brandon sighed, as though torn between pride and practicality. Then, in a quiet moment that surprised Melissa, he set down his phone, turned off the screen, and gently guided his son's hand to the silverware. It was a small but earnest effort to connect. The tenderness of that gesture made Melissa's chest ache with sympathy. She recognized in Brandon the same helplessness she'd felt when her grandmother's health first declined, the terrifying sense of not having all the answers. When the meal ended, Brandon paid the check, leaving a tip that was again unexpectedly large. Melissa tucked the cash into her apron, uncertain what to make of his generosity. She followed them to the doorway, offering a polite goodbye. Nathan reached out to wave, nearly knocking his phone to the floor. Melissa caught it just in time, glimpsing the screen as she did so, a background photo of father and son at a baseball game, both grinning widely. "Thank you," Brandon murmured, a slight tension in his voice. Melissa forced a calm smile. "Of course. Have a safe evening." She returned to the now empty table to clear it, her heart pounding with questions. Should she mention her grandmother's plight? Confront him about the medication prices? Part of her yearned to corner him and demand he do something, yet she also needed her job. Patricia had warned the staff never to upset important clients. Melissa sighed as she gathered the plates. Perhaps fate would give her another chance to speak up. For now, she would keep her silence, uncertain whether Brandon Thornton was a potential ally or the very symbol of an uncaring system she despised. As she took a final glance at the door, she noticed Brandon standing by the window with Nathan, adjusting the boy's jacket. Their eyes flicked back in her direction as if they sensed her gaze. Melissa quickly looked away, her emotions tangled. She found herself torn between gratitude for his tip, sympathy for his struggles, and anger at the harsh reality his company perpetuated. The coincidence of their lives intersecting again filled her with both apprehension and a faint, inexplicable hope. During her next shift at Bellamy's, Melissa felt a mix of anticipation and dread humming under her skin. She was wiping down the gleaming marble bar when, to her surprise, Brandon Thornton strode in once more. Patricia welcomed him, and Nathan rolled in beside his father, excitement shining in his eyes. This time, though, there was no phone pressed to Brandon's ear. Instead, he scanned the room until his gaze landed on Melissa, and he offered a measured nod of acknowledgement. Just as she gathered her courage to approach them, her friend Sophia intercepted. "It's your table again," Sophia said gently. "Patricia thinks it makes sense that you serve him, since you've already built rapport with Nathan." A knot twisted in Melissa's stomach. She reminded herself that this was just another patron, but as she made her way toward their table, she caught glimpses of her past, the medical ambitions she'd been forced to set aside. She recalled how she'd once had the knowledge and drive to help people just like Nathan in a clinical setting, not simply by cutting their food. Clearing her throat, she arrived with a professional smile. "Welcome back. Good to see you both," she said, placing menus in front of them. Nathan beamed. "Dad said we could come tonight because I really wanted to see you again." Melissa's eyes widened slightly, surprised by the boy's openness. Brandon's cheeks reddened almost imperceptibly, and he quickly busied himself adjusting Nathan's napkin. "I thought it'd be nice," Brandon muttered, "for Nathan to have consistency and, well, good service." There was an awkward pause that Melissa filled by offering to refill their water glasses. When she returned, Nathan pointed excitedly to an item on the menu. "Dad, can I try the mushroom risotto?" "Sure," Brandon answered, voice gentler now, "though it might be hard to manage the spoon if the grains are too big." Melissa leaned in, mindful not to intrude. "It's a creamy dish. I can ask the kitchen to make sure the texture is easier for him to handle." Brandon let out a tight breath, as though relieved that someone else understood the practicalities of Nathan's limitations without making a spectacle of them. "That would be helpful," he said quietly. Throughout the evening, Melissa noticed Brandon making a conscious effort to engage Nathan, asking about his day, his physical therapy sessions, even a science project. She also caught a glimpse of vulnerability in Brandon's eyes each time Nathan struggled to pick up his fork or shift in his seat. And although she never mentioned the subject, the question of medication pricing hovered in her mind. At one point, Robert Fletcher, a tall, silver-haired man who occasionally helped out at Bellamy's, wandered by. Robert had once been a promising physician, but a clash with a pharmaceutical corporation had cost him his license. He acknowledged Brandon with a polite nod, then paused to greet Melissa. "You look busy tonight, my dear," he said warmly. "I am," Melissa replied, casting a cautious glance at Brandon's table. "But I manage." Robert's gaze flicked to Brandon as if sensing her tension. "Remember what I always say, knowledge is power," he whispered, patting her shoulder before moving on. Robert knew a thing or two about going up against giants. Later, in a moment of calm, Brandon beckoned Melissa closer. "Nathan told me you helped him quite a bit before. You seem to have a knack for it. May I ask, do you have any medical training?" Melissa's throat constricted. She debated how much to reveal. "I studied pre-med years ago," she finally admitted, "but life got in the way, and I didn't finish." Brandon seemed intrigued. "Why not?" She hesitated, then shrugged as though it were no big deal. "My parents passed away, and I had family responsibilities. It's a long story." A flicker of something, empathy or maybe curiosity, crossed his features. Before he could delve deeper, Nathan piped up to rave about the risotto, providing a perfect out for Melissa to slip away. By the end of the meal, a subtle shift had occurred. Brandon no longer seemed as stiff or guarded. He asked Melissa questions about her work, her hours, her take on certain dishes, as if trying to form a genuine conversation rather than keeping walls up. Nathan, cheerful from start to finish, excitedly recounted how Melissa had shown him how to position his arm for cutting food. When Brandon reached for the check, he paused. "If it's not too personal, are you ever going back to school?" Melissa froze. The question felt oddly intimate, like he was peering into her deepest regret. "I'm not sure," she managed to say. "It's complicated." He nodded, leaving the conversation there. Once again, he tipped generously. But this time it wasn't the money that lingered in Melissa's thoughts. It was the fact that he seemed to recognize her hidden passion, something she'd tried to bury out of necessity. As she cleared their table, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was from the clinic caring for her grandmother, reminding her that Eleanor's coverage had lapsed and urging immediate payment. Melissa's insides clenched. Another wave of dread washed over her. She glanced toward the door where Brandon and Nathan had just exited. The man behind the life-saving medication her grandmother desperately needed had grown more human in her eyes tonight. Yet the gap between their worlds still felt impossibly wide. And for a fleeting moment, she wondered if that chasm could ever be bridged. For the next few days, Melissa's life became a whirlwind of extended shifts and hospital visits. Eleanor's condition took a turn for the worse, leaving Melissa anxious and exhausted. She spent afternoons at the hospital, holding her grandmother's hand as doctors fretted over her medication schedule. By evening, she rushed back to Bellamy's, mustering every ounce of energy to keep her signature warmth while serving patrons. Money was thinner than ever, and the weight of her grandmother's escalating bills pressed down on her like a heavy cloak. Then, late one night, Melissa came in from a frantic shift to find a voicemail from the hospital. Eleanor had suffered a dangerous arrhythmia and was being moved to a higher level of care. Panicked, Melissa ignored her own exhaustion and dashed back out into the cold Chicago air. When she arrived at the hospital, she discovered that her grandmother was stable, but in need of urgent adjustments to her treatment. The medical team suggested a more advanced medication, a newly developed drug from Thornton Pharmaceuticals. The irony burned. Melissa swallowed her frustration, quietly raging at the notion that the one company responsible for jacking up prices was also the only one that produced what Eleanor needed most. She stayed by her grandmother's bedside until visiting hours ended, then trudged back home with the prescription costs swirling in her thoughts. She had no idea how she would pay for it, but giving up wasn't an option. Several days later, Brandon Thornton unexpectedly showed up at Bellamy's near closing time. The dining room was empty except for a few lingering customers, and Patricia was busy finalizing paperwork in the back office. Brandon entered alone. No Nathan in sight. Melissa's exhaustion was obvious, dark circles under her eyes, hair slipping from its neat ponytail. She forced a polite smile, though something in her expression must have revealed her raw worry. "Are you still open?" Brandon asked quietly, noting how deserted the restaurant looked. Melissa nodded. "For a little while longer, but it's pretty calm here now." He slid into a booth, removing his overcoat. She offered him a menu, but he shook his head. "Actually," he murmured, "I just stopped by to ask about Nathan's caregiver. He's been talking a lot about you, but you weren't here the last time we came." Melissa hesitated, uncertain how much to share. "My grandmother is ill. I had to take a few days off." Brandon's gaze sharpened with concern. "Is everything all right?" She looked away. "I don't know," she admitted. Then, surprising even herself, she added, "Her doctors want to switch her to a medication your company produces. The cost is astronomical." His expression flickered, and for a second she thought she saw genuine remorse, but he said nothing. Silence stretched between them, until finally Brandon cleared his throat. "Nathan misses you. He's been asking if you could help with his evening routine. He has physical therapy at home a few times a week, and honestly, I'm not very good at managing it." Melissa raised her eyebrows. "You want to hire me?" "In a sense," he replied, running a hand through his neatly styled hair. "I can offer a salary. Consider it a personal caregiving role. You'd help him with daily tasks, accompany him to therapy sessions, and maybe provide the kind of support he responds to so well." Her mind reeled. The money could be significant, enough to chip away at the looming hospital expenses. But she also felt an immediate conflict tugging at her, working for the man whose corporate practices directly caused her grandmother's crisis. It felt like a betrayal of everything she believed in. "I'm not sure," she said carefully, her voice trembling with emotion. "I appreciate the offer, but it's complicated." Brandon seemed to understand. He lowered his gaze, as though wrestling with his own conscience. "I can't pretend to know your situation, but Nathan's well-being matters more to me than anything. You've seen how he lights up when you're around. And maybe there's something I can do about your grandmother's medication." That caught Melissa off guard. She dropped into the seat across from him, the weight of the day bearing down on her. "What could you possibly do?" she asked, suspicion and hope warring in her chest. He exhaled, shoulders sagging. "I'm the CEO, yes, but my board makes decisions about pricing. I don't handle everything alone. Still, I have influence. Maybe I can push through a subsidy or an exception for your grandmother. If you'd let me—" Their eyes locked, each searching the other for signs of sincerity. Outside, the streetlights cast a yellow glow through the windows, highlighting the hollowness in Melissa's face and the quiet earnestness in Brandon's. She wanted to say yes, if only for the fleeting chance her grandmother might get the life-saving medication. But pride and principle stung her conscience. Could she really trust him? Just then, Patricia appeared from the office, giving Melissa a pointed look as if to remind her of the restaurant's code of conduct. Brandon rose, slipping an elegant business card onto the table. "Think about it," he said softly. "We need you, Melissa. Nathan needs you." Before she could respond, he walked out, leaving her with a tumult of emotions she could barely name. Gripping the card, she felt a mingled rush of desperation, guilt, and a small flicker of possibility. One thing was certain: from this point on, nothing would ever be simple again. Robert Fletcher's wide, steady gaze conveyed more understanding than Melissa had seen in a long time. They stood in the back alley behind Bellamy's, where the muffled clatter of dishes and the lingering aroma of cooked rosemary drifted through the propped-open door. The end of the evening shift gave them a sliver of peace amid the bustle inside. Melissa had just finished recounting Brandon Thornton's job offer and her dilemma over accepting it, her voice raw with conflicting emotions. Robert leaned against a stack of empty produce crates, arms folded over his chest. His silver hair caught the dull glow of the streetlight, and although he wore the server's black uniform, his calm bearing suggested a man who had once commanded great respect. "I was a doctor before all of this," he began quietly. "A cardiologist, actually. Spent 20 years building a reputable practice, then lost it all when I tried to speak out against certain unethical decisions made by—" His lips thinned. "Well, let's just say it was a pharmaceutical giant." Melissa nodded. Though she had guessed he had a medical background, hearing it made her heart pinch. "I'm sorry," she whispered, recalling how her own dream of medicine had been sidelined. "But how does that help me figure out what to do about Brandon Thornton's offer?" Robert smiled ruefully. "I'm telling you because I know what it means to feel powerless. Sometimes It's tempting to believe we can stand outside a broken system and shout at it to change, but that rarely works. You, on the other hand, might have a chance to push for something better from within. She stiffened. But Brandon's part of the very system that put my grandmother in jeopardy. How do I reconcile working for him? It feels like betrayal. Robert lifted a brow. People are more complicated than the companies they run. If he's willing to listen, if he's hiring you, a woman who's openly critical of drug pricing, then perhaps he's not as immune to reason as you think. When Melissa looked uncertain, he continued, "In my case, I banged on the door from the outside and got cast out for it. You have a chance to influence Brandon, to show him the human cost of his board's decisions." That's not betrayal, it's seizing an opportunity. Just then, Sophia poked her head out the back door to remind them the restaurant would close soon. Melissa thanked her and pulled her cardigan tighter, bracing against the crisp Chicago air. "I'm terrified," she admitted, turning back to Robert. "My grandmother's situation is urgent. But even if I accept, can I truly make a difference?" "Perhaps not overnight," Robert conceded, "but you'll be in a position to speak truths he might not otherwise hear. And who knows, you could ease Nathan's life too. The boy seems to adore you." Melissa let out a trembling breath. "I saw the difference in him. He's more engaged, more alive when he interacts with someone who actually wants to help." A moment later, the door opened again, and a slender woman in teal scrubs stepped out. Melissa recognized her as Taylor Johnson, the 26-year-old nurse who had been caring for Eleanor in the hospital. She must have come to pick up some takeout on her break. Spotting Melissa, Taylor offered a warm smile. "Hey, I heard about your grandmother's condition stabilizing a bit," she said. "That's good news. But I also know money is a problem." Her gaze flicked to Robert, then back to Melissa. "Let me know if there's anything I can do to help. Sometimes I hear about assistance programs, even if they're not widely advertised." Grateful for any support, Melissa thanked her. Taylor's dedicated approach with Eleanor had already earned Melissa's trust. "I might be facing a tough decision," Melissa admitted in a hushed tone. "Brandon Thornton offered me a position helping his son. It would mean more financial stability, and maybe even a chance to get my grandmother a better deal on her meds." Taylor's eyes widened. "Wow, that's unexpected." She paused, then added, "But it might be a real opportunity. Don't underestimate your ability to make an impact, even if you're just focused on Nathan at first." The word impact echoed in Melissa's mind. She remembered the spark in Nathan's eyes and the fleeting regret she had glimpsed in Brandon's. Despite her reservations, she sensed a faint glimmer of possibility, of forging a small bridge between cold corporate policies and real human needs. Robert spoke one final time before they headed inside. "Change starts with empathy," he said, tapping his chest with a gentle fist. "You have it in abundance, Melissa. Brandon might need someone like you to remind him what's at stake. The question is whether you're willing to step into that role." Still uncertain but feeling a whisper of resolve, Melissa squeezed Robert's arm in thanks. Then she turned and followed Taylor back inside, her mind spinning with plans. Tonight, she would visit Eleanor and speak with her directly about the job offer. If her grandmother encouraged it, and if it could save Eleanor's life, Melissa would set aside her pride. Perhaps, just perhaps, she could shine a light of compassion into Brandon Thornton's guarded world and find a path that served both Nathan and Eleanor. And maybe, in doing so, she might reclaim part of the dream she'd once lost. Melissa squinted at the morning sun as she emerged from the hospital's sliding doors. The crisp autumn air brought a flutter of orange leaves across the pavement. She had spent most of the night at Eleanor's bedside, listening to the steady beep of the heart monitor that both reassured and unnerved her. The new medication had eased Eleanor's symptoms for now, but the question of how to afford future doses still loomed large. Before leaving, Melissa had quietly explained to her grandmother about Brandon Thornton's offer. Eleanor, frail but ever wise, had gripped Melissa's hand. "You have a gift for helping people, my dear," she'd said. "I don't want to be the reason you abandoned your calling. If this job helps you save me while offering a path forward, then I say do it." Although it stung to think that a corporate titan was her only lifeline, Melissa couldn't deny the gentle encouragement in Eleanor's eyes, so she made the call. Brandon answered on the second ring. His voice sounded less guarded than usual, almost relieved. That afternoon, she met him at a quiet cafe not far from the Thornton Pharmaceuticals headquarters. Over coffee, Melissa set her conditions. She would work full-time as Nathan's caregiver, but maintain her weekend shifts at Bellamy's, at least until her grandmother's situation stabilized. She wanted a clause ensuring her freedom to express concerns about therapy strategies or any medical decisions involving Nathan. Brandon, after a slight hesitation, agreed. "I just ask for respect in front of my staff," he added, stirring sugar into his espresso. "Clara, my executive assistant, can be protective. She might question your background, but ultimately, my decision stands. You're hired." They shook hands, an awkward but significant gesture. As Melissa rose to leave, Brandon cleared his throat. "I'll see what I can do about Eleanor's medication," he murmured. "No promises yet, but I'll talk to some people." She thanked him, aware that her gratitude coexisted uneasily with lingering distrust. The following day, Melissa made arrangements at the hospital. Taylor Johnson offered to keep a closer eye on Eleanor during her absences, promising frequent text updates. Grateful, Melissa found comfort in delegating some responsibilities to someone she trusted. By evening, she had officially started her new role, stepping into Brandon's penthouse apartment for the first time with a small suitcase in hand. Nathan greeted her at the door, eyes bright. "I have my own caretaker now," he asked, voice filled with curiosity and excitement. He was seated in his wheelchair, wearing a t-shirt emblazoned with a NASA logo and sweatpants that looked a bit too large. "Dad said you'd help with dinner, therapy, all that stuff." Melissa laughed softly. "Not sure I'd call myself official caretaker, but yes, something like that." She knelt to meet his gaze. "I'm here to make life easier for you, but also more fun." Brandon, standing nearby, watched their exchange with a cautious smile. "I've cleared out the guest room next to Nathan's. You'll have privacy, but please treat the place like your own." She stepped inside, marveling at the vast space. The marble floors gleamed, and floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city. It felt more like a luxury hotel suite than a home, pristine, orderly, and somehow lifeless. Nathan's presence in his wheelchair seemed dwarfed by the high ceilings and sleek furniture. That night, Melissa juggled her tasks, helping Nathan with simple stretching exercises recommended by his therapist, preparing a meal that suited his needs, and settling him into bed. The boy's gratitude shone like a small beacon. Yet when she finally retired to her new room, exhaustion tugged at her. She perched on the edge of the plush bed and pressed her fingertips to her temples, reflecting on how drastically her life had shifted overnight. Meanwhile, in the boardrooms of Thornton Pharmaceuticals, events continued to unfold. Despite Brandon's position as CEO, certain divisions of the company operated with minimal oversight, prioritizing profits above everything else. According to rumors, another round of medication price hikes was on the table, one that would affect thousands of patients. Although Melissa hadn't confronted him about it directly, she sensed the looming conflict. Back at Bellamy's that weekend, Sophia offered a supportive hug. "You look worn out," she remarked, scanning Melissa's tired eyes, "but I can see you're determined." Robert Fletcher overheard and nodded in agreement. "You have the chance to change lives, starting with Nathan's. Keep your focus, and remember why you're doing this." As Melissa returned to the penthouse later that evening, she felt the weight of two worlds pulling at her. One was the modest life she shared with Eleanor, rooted in struggle, but also in genuine warmth. The other was this high-rise domain of wealth, swirling with corporate ambition and carefully guarded secrets. She couldn't help but wonder if she could truly bridge that gap without losing herself in the process. She paused by Nathan's bedroom door, hearing the soft hum of medical equipment. He was already asleep, chest rising and falling in a gentle rhythm. In that quiet moment, Melissa resolved not to let fear dictate her choices. Regardless of the corporate forces at play, her goal was clear: help this boy live with dignity, save Eleanor if she could, and along the way, keep her own moral compass from spinning out of control. Melissa's first official week as Nathan's caregiver opened her eyes to the stark contrast between her humble upbringing and the opulence of Brandon Thornton's life. On Monday morning, she woke up to the soft hum of automated blinds retracting, revealing a sunrise that illuminated the city skyline through panoramic windows. Instead of the cramped kitchen in her Pilsen apartment, she now stepped into a sleek, state-of-the-art kitchen where Margaret Hugh, the resident housekeeper, was busy preparing a healthy breakfast. Margaret, a reserved woman in her late 50s, nodded politely. "Good morning, Ms. Walker. Coffee's fresh in the pot." Her British accent and impeccable posture made her seem almost regal. Melissa, trying not to seem overwhelmed, poured herself a cup and thanked Margaret. Everywhere she looked, polished countertops, gleaming appliances, announced that cost was never an object here. Soon, Trevor, the driver and part-time security detail, arrived to check on the morning schedule. He was a tall, muscular man with an air of discreet efficiency. "Mr. Thornton is out at a business meeting," Trevor informed Melissa. "He'll be back around noon, so if you need to run any errands with Nathan, let me know and I'll have the SUV ready." Melissa nodded politely, inwardly reeling at the idea of having a personal driver at her disposal. Back in Pilsen, she was used to juggling bus schedules to get to the hospital or home from Bellamy's. She made her way to Nathan's room, finding him awake, scanning images of planets on his tablet. His eyes lit up when he saw her, and together they worked through a gentle morning routine, stretches recommended by his physical therapist, and a quick check of his feeding and medication schedule. Throughout it all, Melissa offered simple praise. "Great job, Nathan," she murmured, as he managed a particularly tricky stretch. He responded with a shy grin. After breakfast, Melissa guided Nathan into the spacious living room. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a breathtaking vista that felt surreal. "It's like we're in our own world up here," she remarked, mostly to herself. Nathan nodded. "Sometimes it's nice," he said, gaze drifting, "but it can also feel lonely." That admission tugged at her heart. The more she observed, the clearer it became that although he was surrounded by every material comfort, Nathan spent most days with only the household staff or therapy specialists for company. Before Melissa could respond, Clara, the efficient and guarded executive assistant, stepped in. Her immaculate suit and clipped heels suggested she'd just come from a business meeting. "Ms. Walker, I trust everything is in order," she asked, her tone polite but distant. "Mr. Thornton wanted to ensure you have everything you need. Also, I'll need to coordinate your schedule with Nathan's daily therapies so we don't overlap important meetings." Melissa found Clara's formality a bit jarring. Still, she forced a measured smile. "That sounds fine. Just let me know if there's anything I should be aware of regarding his medical appointments." Clara's eyes flickered with a hint of skepticism. I'll email you the schedule, she said briskly. And please, if you have any questions, run them by me before disturbing Mr. Thornton. With that, she turned and strode away, leaving behind a trace of expensive perfume and an air of mild disapproval. Melissa exhaled, turning her attention back to Nathan. The boy shrugged apologetically, as though used to the assistant's cool demeanor. Undeterred, Melissa decided to explore ways to bring warmth into Nathan's life. She started by contacting a local adaptive sports organization she'd read about, hoping to plan an outing that would get him outside the confines of the penthouse. However, the moment she mentioned the idea over lunch, Margaret grew visibly uncomfortable. Mr. Thornton rarely allows such outings unless they're carefully planned. He worries about safety, paparazzi, and other complications. Melissa set her spoon down, frustration mounting. Nathan deserves to see more of the world, she said firmly. We'll figure out a way. Later that day, Brandon returned from his meetings, looking exhausted but determined. She found him in his study, scanning a pile of documents. Summoning her courage, Melissa explained her plan for an outdoor excursion, perhaps a trip to a nearby park that specialized in accessible trails. Brandon was silent for a moment, eyes flicking between his papers and her earnest expression. Finally, he sighed. I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I need to be sure Nathan won't be put in a risky situation. He's always had, let's say, a complicated relationship with the outside world. Something in his tone suggested a deep-seated fear. Undaunted, Melissa pressed gently, describing how specialized staff at the park could assist Nathan, ensuring his safety. Brandon ran a hand through his hair. Let me think about it, he conceded. I'm not against him getting fresh air. I want to be sure he's protected. From that conversation alone, Melissa recognized how high the walls were around Nathan, walls built not just by wealth, but by Brandon's guilt and cautious love. Later, as she sat with Nathan in the penthouse library, watching him browse astronomy books, she resolved to find a way past those barriers. For a boy who dreamed of distant galaxies, even the city streets below must have felt as unreachable as the stars. The next morning, Nathan greeted Melissa with a determined smile, clearly energized by the mere prospect of an outdoor adventure. Though Brandon hadn't formally approved the park visit, Nathan's optimism was contagious. He practiced his routine stretches with renewed focus, even managing a few extra repetitions under Melissa's careful supervision. I'm stronger today, he declared proudly, though his arms still shook with effort. Melissa was about to praise him when Clara arrived, phone in hand. There's been a change of plans, she announced tersely. Mr. Thornton wants Nathan to attend a specialized therapy session at the hospital this afternoon. You'll accompany him, of course. Nathan frowned, disappointment crashing onto his features. But what about the park idea? Clara barely looked at him. Your father specifically instructed a hospital session. Her tone offered no room for debate. Then, turning to Melissa, she said, he'll have physical therapy from 2 to 3, then the speech therapist. Don't be late. With that, she pivoted on her heel and departed. After she left, Nathan stared at his clenched hands. I knew he'd find a reason to say no, he said softly. Melissa knelt by his wheelchair, meeting his gaze. It's just a temporary detour, she assured him. We'll try again. In the meantime, let's see if we can make the hospital trip as fun as possible. By midday, Trevor had driven them to the hospital's private therapy wing, an immaculate setting with advanced equipment. Nathan's physical therapist, a kind woman named Angela, guided him through stretches and exercises while Melissa observed. She noticed that Nathan seemed more reserved today, as if the excitement over potential outdoor freedom had been dulled. She offered him quiet encouragement. You're doing great, Nathan. Keep it up. Just then, Brandon appeared, striding down the hallway in a crisp suit. He nodded a greeting, then turned to Angela. "How's he progressing?" Angela shot him a professional smile. "Nathan's flexibility and core strength are improving. But to be honest, he'd benefit from activities beyond these sessions, something that feels more like real life rather than therapy." Brandon's jaw tightened. "I see." He glanced at Melissa, perhaps recalling her suggestion. "Thank you, Angela. I'll keep that in mind." Before Melissa could bring up the park again, Brandon motioned for her to follow him to a quieter alcove near a row of tinted windows. "Clara told me you're still pushing for this outing," he said, keeping his voice low so Nathan wouldn't hear. Melissa swallowed, searching his face. "I think it's important. He's told me he wants to see more of the city. He's missing out on normal experiences. Even if they're small, they matter." Brandon exhaled heavily, placing his palm against the window. "I understand. It's just, for a long time, I left everything to his mother. When we divorced, I took on more responsibility, but I'm still not sure how to protect him without smothering him. I'm terrified of something going wrong." His confession stirred empathy in Melissa. She remembered how helpless she felt watching her grandmother suffer in the hospital. "I get it," she said softly. "Being a caregiver means constant worry. But Nathan is strong, and he wants this. We can do it safely." Their moment of vulnerability was cut short by a ping from Brandon's phone. He glanced at the screen, face clouding. "I have to take this." He paused, then spoke quickly. "I'll think about the park. Let's just stick to the hospital routine for today." Later, after speech therapy, Nathan looked deflated, but managed a small grin when Melissa wheeled him back to the waiting area. "Thanks for being here," he murmured. "It helps." When they returned home, Melissa found the house staff eerily silent. Margaret discreetly mentioned that Clara had been on a rampage all afternoon, grumbling about meddling caregivers. Ignoring any cold stares, Melissa helped Nathan settle in for dinner. She noticed a subtle improvement in his posture, and a certain gleam of determination returned to his eyes when she mentioned the possibility of a future outing. That night, as she reviewed his therapy notes, Brandon knocked on her door. He stood in the hallway, sleeves rolled up, looking far more human than his public persona suggested. "I've been considering your idea," he said quietly, stepping inside. "And I spoke with Trevor. He says the park is manageable if we plan security in advance, so we can schedule it. But let's keep it low-key." Relief and excitement bubbled within Melissa. "That's wonderful news," she said, trying not to sound too triumphant. "Nathan will be thrilled." Brandon's tense expression softened. "I'd just appreciate updates on every detail. I'm not used to letting go of control." "You'll have them," she promised. His eyes flicked to the file in her lap, research on adaptive outdoor activities. He nodded approvingly, then cleared his throat. "Thank you, Melissa. You've already made a difference." And with that, he left. She closed the file, heart pounding with cautious optimism. New rules were unfolding in this penthouse, ones that required a delicate balance of trust, practicality, and boldness. Melissa felt a surge of hope that with a bit more perseverance, both Nathan and Brandon might discover just how much life lay beyond these polished walls. Early the next morning, Melissa woke to find an email invitation awaiting her on her phone. James Wilson, Thornton Pharmaceuticals Director of Research and a close friend of Brandon's, wanted to meet for lunch. She had noticed James at the penthouse once, a tall, genial man in his 50s, but they had exchanged only polite hellos. Curious about his sudden interest, Melissa agreed to meet him in the company cafeteria of Thornton Pharmaceuticals, a sleek space all polished steel and glass. As she arrived, James waved her over to a corner table away from the bustle of employees. "Thank you for coming," he said, greeting her with a handshake. "Brandon speaks highly of you, especially regarding the improvements in Nathan's demeanor." Melissa slid into a chair, trying not to feel out of place among so many corporate professionals. "I'm not sure if it's me or just Nathan finally getting the attention he deserves," she replied modestly. "But it's nice to see him thriving," James nodded. "I've known Brandon a long time. Since before he became a titan of industry, he's always been driven. But after his divorce, he built walls around himself. Nathan was often an afterthought, handled by staff and specialists." Leaning forward, he lowered his voice. "It may surprise you, but I've tried pushing the company toward more ethical pricing for years. The board, especially Victor Harmon, has consistently blocked me." Melissa recognized the name. Victor Harmon was rumored to be the powerful president of Thornton's board, a man deeply resistant to change. She folded her hands. "I'm aware the board holds much of the power, so why tell me this?" Sighing, James straightened. "Because Brandon listens to you in a way he doesn't listen to anyone else. If you can help him see the bigger picture, that real lives hang in the balance, it might tip the scales, especially now, with media scrutiny growing more intense around drug pricing." She felt a surge of gratitude and a pang of frustration. "I want to believe it's possible, but Brandon himself mentioned he can't override the entire board. And there's also Clara, who seems intent on protecting the status quo." James grimaced. "Clara is fiercely loyal to Brandon, but she's also very corporate-minded. She values stability and growth, not moral debates." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "I hear your grandmother is in need of the latest heart medication. My wife passed away from the same condition 2 years ago. It's what motivated me to propose multiple patient assistance programs. They were all shot down." A wave of empathy washed over her. "I'm sorry for your loss," she whispered, thinking of Eleanor. "And yes, that medication is crucial for my grandmother's recovery. I've tried every route, insurance, charity programs. It's out of reach for us." James nodded, his expression resolved. "Then we share a common cause. I still have some influence in the R&D department. If you need data, cost analyses, or even personal stories to persuade Brandon or the board, let me know. We might be able to build a case." They finished lunch, discussing practical steps, and parted ways with a newfound sense of alliance. Melissa felt buoyed by the conversation, but also wary. She knew stepping into corporate politics was fraught with risks. If Victor Harmon discovered she was partnering with James to push for lower prices, she could face serious backlash. Back at the penthouse that afternoon, Nathan was eager for an update on their park outing. She assured him that Trevor was already planning logistics. Delighted, he asked if he could invite a school friend he'd never actually met in person, someone he'd only talked to through an online forum about accessibility. Melissa promised she'd bring it up with Brandon. That evening, she found Brandon in his study, scanning financial reports. The tension in his posture suggested a rough day. Nevertheless, she mustered her courage and mentioned Nathan's request about the friend. He pressed his lips together. "One step at a time. Let's do the park first without complicating it. I'll consider a guest after we see how it goes." Though the words sounded firm, Melissa detected a note of uncertainty, a hint that perhaps he wanted to protect Nathan from disappointment. Before she left, she carefully introduced the idea of talking with James about pricing policies. Brandon stiffened slightly but didn't dismiss it outright. "We'll see," he murmured. "I don't want to get your hopes up about major changes." Later, as she settled in for the night, Melissa's phone buzzed with a text from James. "If you have a moment, I'd like to send you some figures on how medication prices have skyrocketed in the last 5 years. They could be useful if you need evidence." She responded with a grateful thank you, heart pounding at the prospect of pushing for real change. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Margaret quietly confessed that she'd once considered quitting because the house felt so cold, despite its luxury. Seeing Melissa bring warmth to Nathan, and even Brandon, made her reconsider. The conversation left Melissa hopeful that alliances here weren't just found in boardrooms. They could blossom among staff and strangers who cared enough to stand against indifferent systems. Eleanor's health updates remained steady for the time being, giving Melissa a momentary sigh of relief. Tomorrow, she'd focus on ensuring Nathan's big day at the park went smoothly, forging yet another step toward a life that might be more free and fulfilled. While obstacles loomed, Victor, Clara's skepticism, Brandon's insecurities, Melissa was no longer alone. She had unexpected allies and the unwavering determination of a boy who yearned to see beyond a penthouse window, and that, she hoped, might be enough to shift even the mightiest walls. The day began like any other, with Melissa helping Nathan through his morning therapy exercises and quietly encouraging him to push a bit further. But by mid-afternoon, an unmistakable tension invaded the penthouse. Clara swept in, her usual cool poise replaced by stiff impatience. She asked Melissa to come into Brandon's study, where he stood behind his mahogany desk, arms crossed. Nathan, sensing a shift, lingered in the hallway. Clara, eyes narrowed, placed a slim folder on the desk. "I took the liberty of verifying Miss Walker's background," she announced. "We need clarity on certain conflicts of interest." Melissa's stomach turned cold. She'd suspected Clara would eventually dig into her past, but hearing it stated so bluntly still unsettled her. Brandon glanced down at the open folder. A photograph of Melissa from her college days was clipped to a stack of papers. She saw references to the research she'd done in her pre-med program, including a critical paper she wrote on pharmaceutical price hikes. Clara cleared her throat. According to these documents, Melissa publicly criticized Thornton Pharmaceuticals in an academic journal. She essentially accused large companies of prioritizing profit over patient well-being. "You can see how this looks, Brandon." Melissa felt the blood drain from her face. She had no regrets about those opinions. She still believed them, but the timing couldn't have been worse. "I wasn't targeting this specific company," she countered. "It was a broad critique of unethical pricing practices, and I stand by it." Brandon's jaw tightened. "Why didn't you mention this before?" There was no anger in his tone, just a guarded wariness. "I hired you to help Nathan, and now I find out you have a published history challenging the core business model of my firm." "I haven't kept it a secret," Melissa replied, voice trembling slightly. "It's part of why I left school. I felt compelled to speak up. But then life happened. My parents died, and my grandmother needed me. I'm not ashamed of it, but I knew it might jeopardize this job." Clara's gaze flicked over Melissa with barely veiled disdain. "So you're using your position as a caregiver to influence Brandon's decisions, perhaps to enact some personal crusade?" Nathan, who had been hovering outside, couldn't hold back. Wheeling himself into the study, he shot Clara a resolute look. "Melissa isn't on a crusade," he said. "She's helping me." His voice wobbled with emotion. "I overheard you, and you're making it sound like she's some sort of spy. She's not." Clara pursed her lips, but Brandon raised a hand, silencing any response. He took a step toward Melissa, his posture softening when he glanced at Nathan. "I don't doubt you care about my son," he said quietly. "But I also need to know where you truly stand regarding my company." Fighting tears, Melissa reached into her bag. She pulled out a short dossier compiled with James Wilson's guidance of patient stories, cost breakdowns, and the effect of soaring prices on real families. She laid it on the desk. "This is where I stand," she said, voice thick. "It's the reality behind those numbers. My grandmother, Eleanor, is one of those patients, but there are many others. I'm not trying to sabotage you or your company. I want it to do better. An uneasy hush filled the room. Brandon hesitated before picking up the folder, flipping through the pages. His lips parted in stunned silence when he saw some of the figures. Clara looked indignant, but even she didn't interrupt. Instead, she folded her arms as though waiting for Brandon to retake control. Just then, the door opened, and a tall, silver-haired man stepped inside, his suit impeccable. Melissa recognized him from a photograph James once showed her, Victor Harmon, the longtime president of Thornton Pharmaceuticals Board. He cleared his throat. "Brandon, I thought I'd find you here," he said, ignoring Melissa and Nathan. "We need to speak immediately about the latest pricing proposals." When his eyes finally landed on Melissa, he offered only the briefest acknowledgement, then turned back to Brandon. "I didn't realize you were in the middle of a domestic meeting. Perhaps we should finish this conversation at the office. I'll expect you there within the hour." With that, he exited as swiftly as he'd come, his presence casting a chill over the room. After Victor departed, Brandon's attention returned to Melissa. Conflicting emotions warred on his face. Loyalty to his firm, protective love for Nathan, and some deeper feeling for Melissa that he might not yet fully grasp. Nathan, observing his father's hesitation, reached out to grab Melissa's hand. "We need her," he whispered. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Brandon exhaled, tension visible in the set of his shoulders. "Clara, if you'll give us a moment," he said quietly. She hesitated but ultimately left. Brandon turned to Melissa, glancing at the evidence she'd laid out. "We'll discuss this later. For now, just know, I'm not firing you." His gaze flicked to Nathan, then back to Melissa. "But there's a board meeting soon, and I don't think it's going to be pretty." He clasped the dossier to his side as though preparing for battle. Melissa's heart pounded, torn between relief and dread. Nathan squeezed her hand in silent reassurance. Whatever happened next, a line had been crossed. The quiet caretaker role had morphed into something far more consequential, and the first confrontation with corporate power had only just begun. Nathan's birthday arrived on a crisp Saturday morning. Ever since Melissa suggested a small celebration, something more personal than the lavish parties he'd endured under his mother's watch, he had been practically glowing with excitement. Brandon, reluctant at first, eventually agreed to host the gathering at the penthouse rather than some high-end venue. "Nathan deserves a real birthday with real friends," Melissa insisted, and Brandon had relented. On the morning of the event, Melissa caught sight of Brandon awkwardly wrestling with decorative balloons in the living room. The sight amused her, given his usual air of professionalism. He shot her a self-conscious grin. "Don't say a word," he warned, struggling to tie a ribbon to one particularly rebellious balloon. "I'm used to board meetings, not this." She laughed gently, then approached to help secure the knot. "You're doing fine," she said, glancing around at the colorful streamers. "Nathan is going to love this." It was a simple gathering. Nathan had invited a school friend he'd met through an online forum, a few therapists who had become like extended family, and Sophia from Bellamy's, who kindly volunteered to bake a cake. James Wilson also made an appearance, bearing a wrapped present that looked suspiciously like a stack of science books. Brandon stayed close to his son, introducing himself to guests and occasionally checking in with a cautious sort of pride. Only Clara seemed determined to keep her distance, offering curt nods whenever a new face arrived, but mostly staying glued to her phone. As the party got underway, Nathan beamed in his wheelchair beside a table loaded with snacks. For once, he seemed less self-conscious about his mobility issues, thanks to the presence of people who genuinely accepted him. When the time came to light the candles, Sophia presented a homemade chocolate cake. A small group gathered around, singing an enthusiastic, if slightly off-key rendition of Happy Birthday. Nathan blushed, eyes shining with gratitude. Before he blew out the candles, he looked to Melissa and Brandon. "Thank you both," he said softly. "I've never had a birthday like this." Once the party's energy settled, Brandon and Nathan drifted toward the penthouse's large windows, where a mild autumn sunset bathed the skyline in gold. Melissa joined them, noticing how Nathan leaned contentedly against his father's side. Brandon, in turn, gently rested a hand on Nathan's shoulder. It was a small moment of closeness that felt monumental. After a while, Nathan wheeled away to show his friend a new computer program. Sensing a chance to talk, Melissa turned to Brandon. "He's come so far in just a short time," she remarked. "I think participating more in his therapy sessions has really helped him. And you?" Brandon nodded, gaze still on Nathan. "I didn't realize how distant I was until recently," he admitted, voice subdued. "Your encouragement to be hands-on, it opened my eyes." He paused, then inhaled deeply. "I'm beginning to question other things too. This fiasco with the dossier reminded me how often I sign off on decisions without asking deeper questions." Melissa offered a small smile. "It's a start. I know there's still friction with the board, especially Victor, but maybe small victories can add up." Just then, James strolled over, catching the tail end of their conversation. "I agree," he chimed in. "Brandon, the more involved you get with real people, like Nathan, like Melissa, the more you'll see the disconnect between your personal values and some of the company's choices." Melissa studied Brandon's reaction. He looked uneasy, but not dismissive. James changed the subject, describing a blueprint for a patient assistance program he'd been quietly working on. Brandon listened, occasionally glancing at Melissa. "We'll talk," he said, not committing but not rejecting it either. As the last guests trickled out, Brandon thanked everyone for coming, lingering particularly when he shook Sophia's hand. She offered a friendly nod. "It's nice to see a father so dedicated," she said simply before heading for the elevator. Later, Melissa helped Margaret and Trevor tidy the scattered cups and wrapping paper. Nathan, tired but happy, had already fallen asleep in his chair. Brandon approached, sleeves rolled up. He looked exhausted, though a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Today was different," he said. "Better. I haven't seen him this happy in a long time." Despite the warmth of the moment, Melissa caught a flicker of worry in his eyes. She knew the board meeting loomed in the background, along with the precarious situation concerning drug pricing. For now, though, she decided to let the day end on a positive note. They'd won a small victory, forging genuine closeness between father and son. Perhaps that closeness would serve as a shield when the corporate battles resumed. Quietly, she slipped away to check on Nathan, who was dozing peacefully. In that gentle, late-night hush, she could almost believe that genuine compassion might turn the tide. Tomorrow might bring fresh conflict, but for this one day, they'd found a precious respite, a reminder of what they were all fighting for. The following week brought a dose of unwelcome reality. Eleanor experienced a sudden relapse. Melissa was on her way back from a medical supply store when she received the panicked phone call from Taylor Johnson. "Her heart rate's all over the place," Taylor reported. "We're moving her to the ICU." Melissa's chest constricted. She felt the world blur as she hailed a taxi to rush to the hospital, ignoring the curious looks from passers-by. By the time she arrived, Eleanor was stable but exhausted, her breaths shallow beneath an oxygen mask. Melissa clutched her grandmother's hand, fighting the tears that threatened to spill. Later that evening, Brandon appeared at the hospital, wearing concern like an ill-fitting garment. He approached Melissa gently. "I heard," he murmured, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Taylor contacted me. How is she?" Melissa exhaled shakily. "She's alive, but they say she needs the new medication as soon as possible." The coverage has been denied again, and I just don't have—" Her voice cracked with frustration. "I don't have the money, Brandon." He hesitated, glancing around the beeping monitors and bustling nurses. "We'll figure something out, I swear." Not long after, Nathan arrived, escorted by Trevor. Despite the hospital's sterile environment, the boy was determined to be there. He reached for Melissa's hand. "Are you okay?" he asked, voice trembling with empathy. For a moment, she managed a small smile for Nathan's sake. "We're getting through it," she said softly. A few hours later, Melissa took a short break from Eleanor's room to pace the hallway, mind churning with dread. Brandon found her there, tapping nervously on his phone. "I'm going to talk to the head of our patient advocacy department," he said, trying to sound confident. "I'll push them to expedite a subsidy or an exception for your grandmother." "That's not the only issue," Melissa replied, a note of bitterness creeping into her tone. "There are countless patients like Eleanor who can't afford these drugs. Your company's pricing, maybe you didn't set it personally, but your name is on it." Brandon ran a hand over his face, looking older than his 45 years. "I never claimed to be blameless," he said quietly, "but I'm starting to see how deeply harmful some of these practices are. Give me time, Melissa." She turned away, tears threatening her composure. "I don't know how much time Eleanor has," she whispered. Before she could say more, Nathan wheeled into the corridor, his eyes darting between them. "Is everything okay?" he asked timidly. It tore at Melissa's heart to see him so worried. She swallowed her frustration for his sake. Later, back at Eleanor's bedside, memories washed over Melissa, her parents' funeral, the day she dropped out of medical school to care for her grandmother, her first shift at Bellamy's. She felt an overwhelming urge to speak. "Grandma," she whispered, leaning close, "I sometimes resent the choices I had to make. Then I feel guilty because it wasn't your fault." Eleanor opened her eyes, lips quivering. "Oh, my dear, you've given up so much. If only I had—" "I wish there was a way to let you live your dreams." Melissa stroked her grandmother's hand. "I'm not giving up hope. Brandon says he'll try to help." The words tasted uncertain on her tongue, but she clung to them. That night, as the medical staff managed Eleanor's condition, Melissa sat in the waiting area with Brandon and Nathan. She decided to share something she hadn't before, the full story of her parents' accident. "They were on their way to my scholarship ceremony," she said, voice hollow. "It was supposed to be the start of a bright future." Nathan looked stricken. "I'm so sorry." Brandon, placing a hand on Nathan's shoulder, simply listened. Eventually, he spoke in a low tone. "I was never there when Nathan was born. I was caught up in expansion deals and traveling constantly. Sometimes I wonder if I could have prevented the complications if I'd been more involved." Melissa recognized that same knot of guilt she carried in herself, reflected in Brandon's eyes. They both sat in silence, the weight of regrets thick between them, while the beep of hospital monitors kept metronomic time. Across the corridor, a figure appeared. Victor Harmon, in a tailored suit that looked out of place amid the stark white walls. Melissa stiffened. She had no idea why he would come here, of all places. Sensing Brandon's startled glance, Victor offered a curt nod. "I heard about the child's caretaker's grandmother," he said, voice devoid of warmth. "I wanted to see how this might affect your schedule, Brandon. The board meeting is in 2 days." Brandon's gaze hardened. "Is this really the time?" Victor shrugged. "You know how vital these meetings are. Don't let personal matters cloud your judgment." His eyes flicked briefly to Melissa, then he stepped away, leaving only a palpable tension in his wake. A cold anger stirred within Melissa, but she forced herself to remain calm for Eleanor's sake. Brandon looked equally unsettled. He reached for Melissa's hand in an impulsive gesture of support. Nathan observed them, quiet and anxious. As the night wore on, Melissa vowed that neither Eleanor's life nor Nathan's well-being would become collateral in corporate games. Painful truths had come to light. Brandon's guilt, Melissa's desperation, Victor's callousness, and there was no turning back. Something had to change, and soon. In the days leading up to the emergency board meeting, a palpable dread settled over Thornton Pharmaceuticals. Rumors flew of an impending shakeup, with Victor Harmon at the helm. Melissa felt the tension too, noticing how Brandon's phone pinged constantly with urgent notifications, while Clara's iciness intensified whenever they crossed paths. On the morning of the meeting, Melissa stayed at the penthouse with Nathan. Both she and the boy sensed a storm brewing. "I wish I could be there," Nathan admitted, fiddling with the controls on his wheelchair. "Dad's not great at talking about his feelings, or even doing the right thing when it's risky." Melissa set a gentle hand on his shoulder. "He cares about you more than anything," she said, "but he's under enormous pressure." Halfway through the day, the door swung open. Brandon entered, looking grim, followed by Clara and she, to Melissa's surprise, James Wilson. Brandon asked Nathan to wait in the living room, then summoned Melissa to the study. He closed the door behind them, tension thick in the air. James spoke first, his tone urgent. "The board wants you gone," he told Melissa bluntly. "They claim you're meddling in company affairs and stirring up dissent." His gaze hardened. "Victor used the dossier Clara found to paint you as a risk, someone who might leak information." Melissa's heart pounded. She glanced at Clara, who stood by the window, arms folded. The assistant's eyes flickered with something like guilt, though her posture remained rigid. "I didn't expect the board to move this fast," Clara said softly, not quite meeting Melissa's gaze. "Victor's never liked the idea of Brandon having outside influences, especially not from someone who challenged the company." Brandon lifted a stack of papers from his desk and handed them to Melissa. "These are the official complaints," he explained. "They're demanding I terminate your employment immediately, or they'll push a vote of no confidence against me as CEO." Melissa's stomach clenched at the ultimatum. Brandon's leadership or her job, with no middle ground. She felt a wave of guilt. "So they want you to choose between me and your position," she said, voice trembling. "I understand if you can't risk it." James cleared his throat, determined. Victor's angling to gain full control of the company. "If Brandon removes you from the equation, it's a temporary appeasement, but it won't fix the deeper ethical issues at stake." Brandon met Melissa's gaze. Conflict etched in every line of his face. "This isn't just about my job. It's about the future of the company and patients like your grandmother. If I step down or get removed, Victor will tighten his grip on pricing. Things could get worse for countless people." Melissa couldn't ignore the magnitude of the situation. She also couldn't forget Eleanor's precarious condition. Her grandmother relied on a new medication that might be shelved or priced higher if Victor gained more power. "What if I resigned?" she offered, throat tight. "Would that protect you long enough to push through some changes?" Brandon's eyes flashed with pain. "I don't want you to go. Nathan needs you. I need you." The admission hung in the air, raw and vulnerable. Clara shifted uncomfortably, while James appeared unsurprised. A sudden ringing interrupted them. Brandon's phone. The hospital was on the line, updating him on Eleanor's condition. She was stable for now, but the cost of her next treatment cycle was officially denied by the insurer. Brandon ended the call, jaw clenched. He glanced at Melissa. "We can't afford to wait," he murmured. "I'm supposed to meet with the full board tomorrow. They'll push me to choose. Still clutching the complaint papers, Melissa inhaled shakily. "I don't want you losing your life's work over me. If I step away, maybe we can buy time." James shook his head. "Victor won't stop there. He wants to revert the new therapy assistance programs we've been drafting. He'll make sure the price hikes go through. We might only have one shot to stand up to him, collect enough allies on the board to block his power grab." Melissa felt her knees weaken. It was too much. Nathan's well-being, Eleanor's health, Brandon's position, and the fate of thousands of patients. "I don't see how we can do all this," she whispered. Brandon studied her, the fierce intensity in his eyes returning. "We might have an ace up our sleeve," he said. "But it involves documents you and James have been gathering, real proof that certain board members knowingly suppressed more affordable medication options. We present it at the board meeting, force them to confront the evidence, and then hopefully rally enough votes." Clara spoke up for the first time in minutes. "That's risky. If it fails, Victor will bury you." Her gaze flicked to Melissa. "He'll bury you both." A heavy silence fell. Then, in a determined voice, Melissa answered, "Eleanor's life is on the line. So is Nathan's future. I'm in." Brandon exhaled, relief mingled with worry. "Then tomorrow's meeting is our crossroads. We either bend to Victor's demands or take a stand." James nodded. "We'll gather what we can. But be ready, he'll fight dirty." No one in the room had illusions of an easy victory. But as Melissa glanced at Brandon's tense shoulders and remembered Nathan's hopeful eyes, she clung to the fragile belief that sometimes doing the right thing was worth risking everything. The morning dawned grey and foreboding on the day of the board meeting. Despite the early hour, Melissa was wide awake, her pulse a hammer in her chest. Nathan, too, was up before sunrise, determined to show his support. With Trevor's help, he insisted on accompanying Brandon to corporate headquarters. "I'm not staying behind this time," he declared, gaze steely. Brandon hesitated but finally relented, giving Melissa a somber nod. "He might bear witness to some harsh realities," Brandon said quietly. "But maybe this will help him understand what we're fighting for." They arrived at the gleaming Thornton Pharmaceuticals tower, passing rows of marble pillars and glass walls that reflected a sky heavy with clouds. Word of the internal strife must have reached the media. Several reporters hovered near the entrance, cameras snapping. Security quickly ushered Brandon, Melissa, Nathan, and James into a private elevator that ascended to the boardroom floor. Inside the polished conference room, a long mahogany table gleamed under fluorescent lights. High-backed chairs surrounded it, each occupied by board members with grave expressions. At the head sat Victor Harmon, his silvery hair combed back, suit impeccable. Clara stood off to one side, looking tense but professional. Victor wasted no time. "Thank you all for assembling on short notice," he began, voice resonating in the hush. "We have pressing matters to address. Namely, the conduct of our CEO and his continued association with certain disruptive influences." His gaze swept to Melissa with cold precision. Nathan, by Melissa's side, bristled but stayed quiet. Brandon stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Before we get into that, I have evidence we all need to see." He nodded at James, who produced a folder of documents plus a flash drive containing internal reports. "Some of our board members might be unaware that certain proposals for more affordable medications were buried by top-level decision-makers in the name of profit margin increases." The tension in the room skyrocketed. Victor's eyes narrowed. "This is irrelevant. We're here to discuss your breach of trust in hiring an outsider with an open bias against our corporate interests." Melissa's heart pounded, but she summoned courage. "I am biased toward human lives," she said, voice steady. "And I'm not the only one. Many employees here have lost family members due to unaffordable treatments. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. One cleared his throat, eyeing the folder James was handing out. Victor rose from his chair, slamming his palm on the table. "This is a waste of time. The real issue is that Mr. Thornton brought a potential whistleblower into our midst." Nathan surprised everyone by speaking up then, rolling his wheelchair forward. "She's not a whistleblower. She's my caregiver," he declared, chin held high. "And thanks to her, my dad and I have a better relationship. She helped me realize that some decisions your company makes hurt people, like her grandma, like me." Victor shot him a frigid glare. "With all due respect, young man, this is a corporate matter." Undeterred, Nathan pressed on. "Corporate matters affect real people," he insisted. "I'm living proof. If you keep raising prices, a lot of us can't get what we need." At that, Brandon plugged the flash drive into a large screen at the front of the room. Charts appeared, depicting skyrocketing prices for a range of medications. Lines soared upward, far outpacing inflation or research costs. Whispers spread around the table as board members skimmed the printed documents. Several looked alarmed, while a few seemed more concerned with how these revelations might impact the company's public image. Victor tried to wrest control of the narrative, urging the members to dismiss the data as partial and misleading. But James methodically pointed to the research, citing credible sources. "We proposed a patient assistance program to offset these prices, but it was killed in subcommittee. Meanwhile, our profits soared, even as patients were turned away." An older board member, Diana Roberts, furrowed her brow. "I'd heard about these programs in passing. Why were they never brought to a vote?" Melissa could feel the tide shifting. Brandon pressed the advantage. Victor blocked the proposals, citing cost inefficiency. "But as you can see, the actual cost to the company is minimal compared to the damage inflicted on those who need the treatments. Our brand's reputation is also at risk." Victor erupted, eyes flashing. "This meeting has gone off the rails. I move to dismiss Brandon Thornton from his position as CEO for bringing unscrupulous elements into the company." He pointed an accusatory finger at Melissa. A tense hush fell. Then Nathan spoke again, voice trembling but resolute. "If you fire my dad, you'll be making the worst decision of your life, because we have more than enough proof here to show that you're the one who's unscrupulous." His small hand gripped the wheelchair's arm tightly. At that moment, the conference room door swung open, revealing a staffer carrying an envelope. Brandon opened it, scanning the letter inside. He let out a sharp breath. "It's a formal request from outside investors," he said, addressing the board. "They want confirmation that Thornton Pharmaceuticals will take ethical steps to address drug pricing. If we don't comply, they'll consider pulling their support." Alarm rippled among the members. Victor looked cornered, though defiance still burned in his eyes. Brandon seized the momentum. "I propose we vote on implementing the patient assistance program that James has outlined and reevaluate the pricing structure that's caused so much harm." Silence hung in the air. One by one, board members exchanged glances. The power balance felt fragile. Melissa's pulse thundered in her ears as she waited to see if they had really turned the tables on Victor. A measured calm followed the tumultuous board showdown, at least on the surface. The meeting had ended with no definitive outcome. Several board members agreed to review Brandon's proposal, while Victor retreated to regroup. As they left the boardroom, Brandon warned Melissa and Nathan, "This isn't over. Victor's going to fight tooth and nail." Over the next several days, a flurry of confidential emails and late-night strategy sessions consumed the penthouse. James worked closely with Brandon to refine the patient assistance program, generating detailed cost analyses and public relations angles that might win over skeptical investors. Meanwhile, Melissa compiled testimonials from patients and doctors, painting a human face on the crisis. It was exhausting but energizing, fueled by a sense of mission. Nathan, more determined than ever, spent his evenings researching other pharmaceutical companies that had adopted ethical pricing models. "Look at this," he said one night, swiveling his wheelchair to show Melissa an article about a smaller firm reducing costs for rare disease treatments. "If they can do it, why not Thornton?" Melissa ruffled his hair affectionately. "That's exactly the question we want people asking. Good job, Nathan." Outside, autumn slipped toward winter. The city's skyline sparkled under early evening lights. But inside the penthouse, tension simmered. Margaret whispered rumors about Clara's changing attitude. Apparently, the assistant had a private conversation with Brandon, and ever since, she'd stopped openly undermining Melissa. "Could be she's seen which way the wind is blowing," Margaret speculated, yet uncertainty loomed. Eleanor's condition remained stable only because Brandon was covering her latest treatments through a hushed arrangement with the hospital. The knowledge that her grandmother's life was tethered to Brandon's precarious position weighed heavily on Melissa. One phone call from Victor, one shift in policy, and Eleanor could be left stranded again. Adding to the pressure was an unexpected visitor, Vanessa, Nathan's mother and Brandon's ex-wife. She breezed into the penthouse one evening, exuding a chilly sophistication that made even Clara seem mild by comparison. Nathan froze at the sight of her, his knuckles whitening on the wheelchair's handles. "Darling," Vanessa cooed, bending down to air-kiss Nathan's cheek. "I've missed you. I've been traveling. Paris, London." She trailed off, surveying the living room as if appraising a property. "Brandon," she greeted coolly when he emerged from his study. He folded his arms. "Vanessa, what brings you here unannounced?" She gave a dismissive shrug. "I heard rumblings about corporate trouble. I wanted to see if it affects my child's lifestyle, especially if you lose your position." Her eyes landed on Melissa and her expression soured. "And I see you've hired new help." Melissa bristled but kept silent, recognizing that antagonizing Vanessa would only make things harder for Nathan. The boy's posture spoke volumes. He was tense, clearly uncomfortable with his mother's sudden interest. Sensing the atmosphere, Brandon guided Vanessa into a nearby sitting room, leaving Nathan and Melissa alone in the hallway. "She never cared like this before," Nathan whispered, voice tinged with hurt. "She always left me with nannies and private therapists. Now she's here because she's worried about money." Melissa squeezed his shoulder. "Let's give them a moment to talk. Meanwhile, you and I can focus on what's important, your progress and the upcoming board decision." As the evening progressed, Brandon managed to keep Vanessa at bay, though not without heated arguments behind closed doors. By the time she finally left, slamming the door on her way out, the penthouse felt as though a storm had passed through. Later, Brandon joined Melissa in the study, exhaustion carved into his features. "She wants more custody of Nathan if I lose my CEO role," he admitted. "Claims I won't be able to provide the lifestyle he deserves. It's empty legal posturing, but it's the last thing I need right now." Melissa's heart went out to him. "We'll handle it." One step at a time, they returned to finalizing their proposals for the next board meeting, now only days away. Word spread that Victor was rallying certain shareholders to his side, sowing doubts about Brandon's leadership. Meanwhile, James discovered more internal documents supporting the case for ethical pricing. The stakes felt higher than ever. In quieter moments, Melissa found solace checking on Eleanor, who showed slight improvement in the ICU, thanks to the medication. Each phone call from the hospital reminded her why she was fighting. If they prevailed, people like her grandmother could receive fair access to life-saving treatments. If they failed, not only would Brandon's position crumble, but a broken system might tighten its grip, pushing countless families into despair. On the eve of the big presentation, the penthouse buzzed with subdued urgency. Margaret served tea to James and Brandon as they rehearsed their talking points. Clara surprisingly joined in, reviewing slides with furrowed concentration. Nathan contributed by organizing video testimonies from doctors, while Melissa checked everything twice, nerves fluttering in her stomach. Midnight came and went, and still they worked. In that hush of the early morning hours, a shared sense of purpose bound them together. Whatever personal histories or corporate hierarchies once divided them had been overshadowed by the conviction that righting a systemic wrong was possible. Tomorrow, they would face the board again. Tomorrow, the true battle would begin. Brandon Thornton stood at the head of the imposing boardroom table, heart pounding beneath his tailored suit. To his right, James Wilson flipped through a stack of meticulously prepared reports, while Melissa Walker and Nathan quietly observed from a few chairs away. Victor Harmon, seated at the far end, with a small cluster of allies, watched Brandon with hooded eyes. Outside, the city lights glittered against the evening sky, as if reflecting the high stakes within. Brandon cleared his throat. "We've reconvened to finalize the discussion on Thornton Pharmaceuticals' new patient assistance initiative and the related pricing reforms." His voice was steady, yet a slight tremor betrayed the tension coiling in his chest. Victor responded with a thin smile. "Yes, well, we're also here to address concerns about your leadership. Let's not forget that." Several board members nodded, casting side glances at Melissa. She felt the weight of their scrutiny, yet refused to shrink under it. Her presence here, as caregiver, advocate, and de facto challenger to their profit-driven status quo, was a focal point of controversy. Taking a deliberate breath, Brandon launched into a clear, concise summary of the proposal James had helped refine. Charts popped up on the screen behind him. Evidence of unconscionably high drug prices, case studies of patients including Eleanor, and projected financial models showing that moderate price reductions would still yield sustainable profits. Melissa had insisted they include personal testimonies, brief videos of doctors and patients describing the dire consequences of unaffordable medications. One such video featured an elderly man in tears over his inability to pay for his late wife's cancer treatment. As the recording ended, a hush fell. Diana Roberts, one of the more senior board members, swallowed hard. "I had no idea it was this widespread," she murmured, glancing at her colleagues. Sensing momentum, Brandon concluded with his key point: "We can be both profitable and humane." The updated pricing structure provides long-term stability, while the patient assistance program directly addresses those in need. Our brand image will improve, and the public backlash we're courting by ignoring these realities could be devastating. Victor steepled his fingers. "Interesting presentation, Brandon, but you forget. Our primary duty is to maximize shareholder returns. We can't let emotional appeals derail the company's growth." With that, he stood, directing the conversation toward the matter of leadership. He demanded a vote of no confidence against Brandon, citing reckless interference from external influences, namely Melissa. "We have a responsibility," Victor insisted, "to protect Thornton Pharmaceuticals from internal sabotage." Nathan, sitting near Melissa, nudged his wheelchair forward. Though his voice trembled, he spoke clearly. "My dad isn't sabotaging anything. He's trying to help people like me, like Ms. Walker's grandmother." A silent wave of empathy seemed to pass through some of the board members who had never before heard the boy speak in an official setting. Victor's expression hardened. "This meeting is for board members only, young man." "Respectfully, you're out of order," Nathan pressed his lips together, prepared to speak again, but Melissa gently placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. She rose from her seat, addressing the table. "Respectfully, Mr. Harmon, Nathan has every right to be here. His future and the futures of countless patients hinges on these decisions. Thornton Pharmaceuticals can't exist in a vacuum, isolated from the real lives it affects." A stir rippled among the board members. Over the past few weeks, some had grown uneasy with Victor's absolutist stance. Diana Roberts tapped her pen. "We've seen the data, we've heard personal accounts, and we've watched the public scrutiny mount. If we continue on the current path, we risk a scandal that could shred shareholder confidence. Mr. Thornton's proposal may be the wiser route." Victor's jaw clenched, but he pressed on. "I call for an immediate vote. Either we uphold Brandon as CEO under the condition that he removes certain influences and retracts these radical price changes, or we replace him altogether." Brandon's gaze swept the room. He felt the tension in every breath, but a strange clarity settled over him. "I will not withdraw the proposal," he said, voice firm, "and I will not dismiss Melissa Walker, whose insights and empathy have helped shine a light on our moral obligations. If you believe I'm unfit to lead, you can remove me, but I won't betray the principles I've come to believe in." Silence reigned. Finally, Diana spoke. "We'll vote now." As the board members cast their votes, the room crackled with suspense. Melissa clutched the armrest of Nathan's wheelchair, bracing for the outcome. The initial tally was split. Those aligned with Victor looked grim, while a few moderates expressed uncertainty. The deciding vote fell to Diana Roberts. Slowly, she turned to face the table. "I've served on this board for over a decade," she began. "I've seen expansions, acquisitions, and leaps in profits. But I can't ignore the moral cost any longer." She paused, then locked eyes with Brandon. "I vote to retain Brandon as CEO and to move forward with his proposal." A collective exhale seemed to shake the room. Victor's composure cracked. He stood abruptly, condemnation blazing in his stare. "You'll regret this," he snapped, sweeping up his briefcase and storming out. A few of his closest allies trailed behind him, their exit like a retreat from a lost battle. Brandon, breathing hard, caught Melissa's eye. A mixture of relief, shock, and exhilaration coursed through them. Nathan smiled so brightly it almost brought tears to Melissa's eyes. The company had made its choice. Whether the reforms would fully succeed remained unknown, but for the moment they had carried the day. In the early morning after the board's watershed vote, the glow of sunrise filtered into the penthouse. Melissa peered out the tall windows at Chicago's awakening skyline, letting the orange-pink light spill over her face. A sense of hard-won serenity settled in her chest. They had survived the final confrontation, or so it seemed. Now came the delicate task of mending the wounds left behind. Nathan wheeled into the living room, his expression alight with optimism. "Dad said we might visit Grandma Eleanor today," he said, eyes shining. Melissa nodded. "Yes, I think she'll be thrilled to see you again." Brandon, overhearing them as he tidied up scattered documents from the night before, approached. "I want to check in on her too," he said, offering Melissa a small, earnest smile. "We owe a lot to your grandmother, in a way. Without her situation making everything so painfully clear, I might never have taken this leap." By midday, they were at the hospital. Eleanor's condition had stabilized further since her last scare. The new medication, now no longer hindered by cost, thanks to Brandon's intervention, had helped ease her symptoms. Taylor Johnson, the dedicated nurse, greeted them with a grin. "You should see her," she said to Nathan. "She's been talking about meeting you for weeks." Inside the room, Eleanor's eyes lit up when Nathan rolled in. Though still frail, she had color in her cheeks that Melissa hadn't seen in months. "My goodness," the older woman said, a soft laugh escaping her. "They said I'd have a very special visitor today, but I didn't realize it'd be the young man I've heard so much about." With Melissa's gentle assistance, Eleanor reached out to shake Nathan's hand. He responded with a shy but warm smile. "I've been hoping you'd get better soon," he said. "Melissa tells me a lot about you. You're basically a hero in her life." Eleanor's eyes grew moist. "Not a hero, my dear. Just a stubborn old lady who refuses to give up. But thank you." Brandon lingered in the doorway, allowing them a moment before stepping inside. "I'm glad to see you looking better," he said softly, unsure if his presence might intrude. But Eleanor beckoned him closer, patting the chair beside her bed. "You must be Brandon," she said, her voice touched with gratitude. "I can't thank you enough for helping with this medication." He lowered himself into the chair, suddenly humble in the presence of this gentle woman who had indirectly been the catalyst for his transformation. "I did what needed to be done," he replied, though his voice trembled slightly. "Your granddaughter has a way of reminding people of their better nature." A hush fell, broken only by the steady hum of hospital machinery. Melissa stood near the window, her heart swelling at the sight. Nathan, bridging a gap between Brandon and Eleanor that once seemed unbridgeable. For all the pain and conflict, they had arrived at an unspoken harmony. They shared not just relief at surviving the corporate battle, but also a faint, hopeful sense that change, real, tangible change, was happening. Later that afternoon, Melissa escorted Nathan to the cafeteria while Brandon stayed behind to speak privately with Eleanor. She wasn't sure what they discussed, but when he emerged, he looked pensive yet at peace. "Your grandmother is extraordinary," he said to Melissa as they headed back upstairs to gather Nathan. "She told me she doesn't blame me or any individual for the broken system, but she said I have a chance to fix my corner of it." Melissa's lips quirked into a small smile. She always knew how to make someone believe in redemption. By the time they returned to the penthouse, the day's warmth lingered in the air. Margaret had laid out a simple dinner, sensing everyone's fatigue. As they ate, the conversation flowed naturally, a stark contrast to the tension that once permeated these rooms. They spoke of everyday matters, Nathan's therapy progress, upcoming tasks at Thornton Pharmaceuticals, possible expansions to the patient assistance program. Yet amid the newfound calm, remnants of unease persisted. Melissa worried about the next steps. How would the board's decision play out in practice? Would Victor sabotage them from the sidelines? And what about the personal ties forming between her and Brandon? A flicker of emotion passed between them whenever their eyes met, something that both intrigued and unsettled her. Nathan, finishing his dinner, yawned. "I think today was the happiest I've ever seen Grandma Eleanor," he said. "She even told me some silly jokes. I can't wait for her to come home." The honesty in Nathan's words cut through Melissa's lingering doubts. Despite the uncertainties, they had won a crucial victory that went beyond boardroom votes. A sense of healing now rippled through their small circle, forging bonds that transcended social barriers and lingering guilt. Though challenges still loomed in this moment, each of them basked in a long-awaited sense of relief, ready, finally, to reflect on what it truly meant to move forward from pain towards something brighter. In the weeks that followed the pivotal board meeting, Thornton Pharmaceuticals underwent a slow but noticeable metamorphosis. James Wilson, newly promoted to Director of Ethics and Accessibility, led a task force to implement the patient assistance programs and revisit pricing structures on essential medications. Conferences with hospital administrators, patient advocacy groups, and even government agencies cropped up on the calendar. The once stifled corridors of corporate power grew abuzz with cautious optimism. Melissa watched the changes unfold from her unique vantage point. She balanced her caregiving duties for Nathan with meetings at the office, where she and James often presented real-world stories of people struggling under steep medication costs. Some employees embraced the shift wholeheartedly. Others remained skeptical, fearing reduced profits or potential backlash from investors. Yet progress inched forward. Brandon's schedule became more demanding than ever. He seemed determined to atone for years of detached leadership by engaging directly with the company's transformations. In the penthouse, he stayed up late reviewing policy documents, sometimes falling asleep over spreadsheets. Melissa would quietly drape a blanket over him, a tender gesture that grew more frequent as days passed. "You should get some rest," she murmured one night, finding him dozing on the couch. His tie was loosened, and the lines of stress etched around his eyes spoke of exhaustion. He stirred at the sound of her voice, blinking up at her with a lopsided smile. "I'll rest when we've turned this ship around," he said, voice husky with fatigue. Meanwhile, Nathan experienced his own transformation. Freed from the penthouse's confines, he began participating in weekly adaptive sports programs and even attended a local astronomy club gathering. His physique grew stronger, and with each passing day, he radiated a confidence that delighted Melissa and moved Brandon to tears. "He's discovering the world," Brandon confessed once, his eyes shining with emotion. "I never realized how much I'd shielded him from it." Their personal bond between Melissa and Brandon also deepened. Subtle glances, lingering touches, and moments of quiet vulnerability began to carve out a new intimacy. While they never openly labeled their feelings, the connection between them grew undeniable. Nathan, astute as ever, noticed too, occasionally offering sly grins whenever he caught them sharing a private smile. Despite these positive developments, trouble lingered in the form of Victor Harmon. He still held sway among certain influential shareholders, and word on the street suggested he was courting a potential merger that could sidestep Brandon's reforms. Rumors buzzed that Vanessa, spurred by financial interest, had cozied up to Victor's camp. The idea of her seeking more custody had been a dormant threat, but now it re-emerged. One chilly evening, a court summons arrived at the penthouse, declaring Vanessa's intent to revisit custody agreements. Nathan stared at the envelope with a mix of anger and hurt. "She wants full custody?" he asked, voice trembling. Brandon rubbed a hand across his brow. "So it seems," he said, exhaling sharply. "She claims the new corporate pressures make me unfit to care for you properly." Melissa's heart sank at the cruelty of the timing. "That can't be true," she interjected. "Anyone can see how much time and love you invest in Nathan." "He's blossoming under your care," Brandon nodded, though his tension was evident. "Vanessa knows I'm vulnerable. She probably thinks I'll cave rather than risk a public legal battle." He turned to Nathan. "Son, we'll fight this. I promise." Nathan glanced at Melissa, fear etched in his features. "I don't want to go back to living in fancy hotels and being looked after by strangers. Dad, I need you. And Melissa." Touched by Nathan's words, Melissa knelt beside him. "We're here, okay? We'll figure this out." The transformation sweeping through Thornton Pharmaceuticals now reached into the personal realm, threatening to reshape the dynamics of Brandon's family life. Even so, there was no going back. The man who once avoided emotional entanglements now found himself deeply invested in both fatherhood and corporate responsibility. And Melissa, who had walked into this penthouse a hesitant caregiver, was evolving into a catalyst for genuine change. That night, after Nathan had gone to bed, Brandon found Melissa on the balcony, wrapped in a coat against the brisk wind. The city lights glimmered around them. Without speaking, he stood beside her, shoulders nearly touching. They watched cars weave through the streets below, each pair of headlights a reminder that countless lives were in motion, each with its own struggles and aspirations. At last, Brandon spoke, his tone quiet. "You've changed everything for me, for Nathan, for this company. I don't know how to properly thank you." She turned to face him, eyes reflecting the city's glow. "You're changing everything too, Brandon. I guess we're in this together, for however long it lasts." A faint smile curved his lips, and he reached for her hand. In the hush of that moment, the hum of traffic and the cold wind seemed distant compared to the warmth that passed between them. Their shared transformation, both personal and professional, was far from complete. Still, the path ahead gleamed with more promise than either had dared to envision a few short months ago. At the courthouse in downtown Chicago, the cavernous hallways bustled with anxious families, attorneys, and clerks hurrying between hearings. Melissa guided Nathan's wheelchair through the throng, while Brandon kept a firm hand on his son's shoulder. They were there for a preliminary hearing regarding Vanessa's attempt to gain full custody. Tension crackled in the air. Inside the courtroom, Vanessa sat next to her sharply dressed lawyer, barely acknowledging Nathan except for a perfunctory smile. Brandon's attorney, a composed woman named Linda Parker, presented their case with calm precision. She highlighted Brandon's active role in Nathan's medical care, his improved relationship with his son, and the stable environment he provided. But Vanessa's side countered with arguments about Brandon's corporate turmoil and the demanding nature of his role as CEO. Melissa found herself breathing shallowly as the debate unfolded, worried about how a judge might interpret these details. When Nathan took the stand, something he insisted upon, his voice quivered. "My dad's job is important, but he still spends more time with me than Mom ever did," he said plainly. "He's the one who's always there after my therapy sessions, always making sure I have what I need. And Melissa, she's my caregiver. They're the closest thing to a real family I've had in a long time." Melissa swallowed hard, touched by his openness. At the end of the hearing, the judge decided more information was needed before making any final custody order. A new court date was set, prolonging the uncertainty. Vanessa looked mildly triumphant, while Brandon remained stoic. Outside, Nathan slumped in his wheelchair. "More waiting," he murmured, voice choked with frustration. A few days later, life continued, though the tension of the custody battle lingered. Thornton Pharmaceuticals advanced in its reforms, rolling out its first wave of reduced-price medications under James's supervision. Initial reactions from the public and the media were mixed. Some praised the move toward accessibility, while others questioned whether it was merely a public relations tactic. Still, forward momentum felt like a breath of fresh air in an industry long stifled by profit obsession. Amid these developments, Melissa found a moment to reflect on her own dreams. One evening, she was visiting Eleanor in her newly upgraded hospital room, funded by a patient assistance pilot program that Brandon personally authorized when Robert Fletcher appeared. The tall, silver-haired former doctor greeted her warmly. "I've seen the news," he said with a slow grin. "It looks like your voice is finally being heard." She nodded, eyes drifting to where Eleanor was dozing peacefully. "It's surreal, and there's still so much left to do," she admitted. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm going to wake up and find it all undone." Robert chuckled softly. "You've always had this fire in you, Melissa. Back when we worked at Bellamy's, I saw it every time you helped a diner with a medical concern or comforted a worried friend. Have you thought about finishing your medical studies now that circumstances are changing?" Her heart fluttered. The idea had been at the back of her mind for weeks. But the practicalities, Her responsibilities to Nathan, the unpredictability of her situation with Brandon, made her hesitate. "It crossed my mind," she said, voice subdued, "but I'm not sure if it's the right time. I need to keep supporting Nathan, and my grandmother's health is still fragile." Robert placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Sometimes chasing your dreams isn't selfish. It's exactly what your loved ones want for you." He motioned to Eleanor, softly murmuring, "She'd want you to do it. I know she would." That night, back at the penthouse, Melissa mentioned the conversation to Brandon while they stood in the kitchen, sharing a quiet moment after Nathan had gone to bed. He listened intently, brow furrowing in thought. "I think Robert's right," he said, voice gentle. "Eleanor would be proud to see you continue, and I could sponsor your return to school if that's what it takes." She looked at him, surprised by the sincerity in his gaze. "That's an incredibly generous offer, but I'm not sure." Brandon stepped closer. "Let's not make it about money. It's about you reclaiming something important. You've given so much to help us and to help this company move forward. You deserve to focus on your own aspirations too." Tears pricked at Melissa's eyes. Beneath the swirl of corporate battles, hospital drama, and romantic undercurrents, she'd forgotten the passion that once drove her, a calling to heal people. The thought of re-entering that world both excited and terrified her. Their conversation lingered well past midnight, weaving between hopes for the company and dreams for the future. By the time they retired to bed, a tentative plan had formed in Melissa's mind. She could enroll part-time, continue caring for Nathan, and still be there for Eleanor. Perhaps it wouldn't be easy, but new horizons rarely are. As dawn broke, the penthouse glowed with possibilities. Despite the custody case hanging in the background and the ever-present worry about Victor's next move, Melissa felt an unexpected surge of hope. Her life, once confined to double shifts and mounting bills, now stretched before her like an open road, one she could walk alongside people she cared about, forging a future that combined compassion and purpose in equal measure. A crisp winter wind swept along the streets of Chicago, carrying the promise of new beginnings. 2 months after Thornton Pharmaceuticals launched its revised pricing model, the public response had turned largely favorable. Patients posted on social media about finally affording their prescriptions, and media outlets praised Brandon's leadership. The stock price fluctuated, but found a steady footing, buoyed by investors who valued the company's innovative direction. In a modest ceremony at the company's headquarters, Brandon officially announced the full implementation of a wide-ranging patient assistance program. Journalists crowded the lobby, snapping photos of him flanked by James Wilson and a handful of doctors who had contributed to the initiative's design. Melissa was there too, standing alongside Nathan, feeling a gentle swell of pride. When the applause faded, Brandon stepped aside, microphone in hand. "I'd like to recognize someone who inspired much of this change," he said, his eyes scanning the audience until they landed on Melissa. She froze, heat flushing her cheeks. "Melissa Walker," he continued, "showed me that genuine compassion isn't at odds with running a successful business. She reminded me, and all of us, that behind every profit and loss statement, there are human lives." A wave of applause rippled through the room. Nathan cheered the loudest, grinning ear to ear. Melissa blinked away tears, overwhelmed by the gesture. She managed a small nod of acknowledgement, grateful yet conscious of how surreal it felt to be recognized in such a public forum. Later, as the crowd dispersed, Brandon and Melissa slipped away to a quiet corridor. He took her hand, eyes warm with affection. "Thank you," he murmured, "for everything. I know we still have challenges, especially with Vanessa's custody push, but I wanted you to know how much I value you." Her lips curved into a tender smile. "I think I value you too," she teased gently, her voice a shade above a whisper. Neither of them needed to say more. The strain of the past months had tested their trust, but it had also forged a bond that went deeper than either expected. Outside, they met Nathan, who was chatting excitedly with a small group of reporters curious about his perspective. Spotting Melissa and his father, he excused himself and rolled over, eyes sparkling. "They wanted to know what it's like growing up with a dad who's changing the pharmaceutical industry," he announced, half joking. "I told them it's pretty cool." Brandon ruffled his son's hair. "You're not embarrassed by me?" Nathan feigned a thoughtful look. "Maybe a little," he said, then burst into laughter, joined by Melissa and Brandon both. In the days that followed, good news kept rolling in. The judge, after reviewing further evidence and hearing from Nathan's own therapist, granted Brandon primary custody, allowing Vanessa visitation rights, but no more. The verdict came as a relief to Nathan, who later admitted to Melissa he had feared being uprooted from the life he'd come to cherish. "I can finally breathe," he confided one evening, hugging her with awkward teenage warmth. Meanwhile, Eleanor, regaining strength daily, was transferred out of the hospital to a comfortable apartment near Melissa's old neighborhood. The medication that once seemed impossible to afford was now accessible through Thornton's assistance program. One afternoon, Melissa wheeled Eleanor out into a small courtyard garden, letting the winter sun warm them both. "I owe my second chance to your perseverance," Eleanor told her, voice trembling with gratitude. "And I couldn't be prouder that you're planning to go back to your studies." That comment made Melissa smile with determination. She had officially registered for a part-time pre-med track at a local university, planning to ease in while maintaining her role as Nathan's caregiver. In a sweet turn of fate, Brandon had offered a scholarship in Eleanor's name, aimed at supporting aspiring medical students who came from challenging backgrounds. "We can't change the past," he'd said softly, "but we can create a brighter future for others." On a crisp Saturday, one of those rare, sunny winter days, Brandon organized a small celebration at the penthouse to mark these milestones. Close friends, supportive colleagues, and family gathered in the living room amid soft lights and laughter. Even Clara made an appearance, calmer and more polite than ever, though she stayed mostly at the periphery. Robert Fletcher arrived late, bearing a bouquet of flowers for Eleanor, who sat chatting with Margaret near the fireplace. "You all look so at peace," Robert observed, smiling at Melissa. "It's nice to see everyone enjoying the fruits of their courage." Nathan clinked a spoon against a glass, calling for attention. As the chatter quieted, he cleared his throat. "I just wanted to say," he began, voice faltering from emotion. He steadied himself. "Thank you all for helping me, for helping my dad, for being my family, and especially thank you to Melissa. She showed me kindness that changed my life." A hush fell. Melissa blinked back tears as Brandon gently took her hand. "Here, here," he echoed, raising his glass. The small crowd murmured in agreement, some wiping their eyes. In that room, love, gratitude and resolve mingled, each person cognizant of the battles won and those still on the horizon. But for this moment, they savored the sweetness of victory, the reward not merely in corporate reforms or legal triumphs, but in the forging of deep, unbreakable bonds. For Melissa and Brandon, and indeed for everyone present, a new chapter of hope and purpose had begun. And as the evening air glittered with music and gentle laughter, it seemed clear that their journey, while shaped by adversity, was ultimately guided by compassion, resilience, and a steadfast faith in one another. Winter melted into spring with a gentle thaw, signaling renewal in more ways than just the changing season. For Melissa, early mornings now meant balancing her hospital visits with part-time classes at a nearby university. Evenings belonged to Nathan, whose progress continued to blossom under her guidance. Brandon, meanwhile, split his hours between the relentless responsibilities of CEO and a newfound commitment to family life that, not so long ago, felt unimaginable. One breezy March afternoon, Melissa and Brandon lingered in the penthouse's expansive living room. The floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a brightening skyline, the sun glinting off distant skyscrapers. Nathan had just finished a productive physical therapy session and retreated to his room for a well-deserved nap. Eleanor, recently discharged from the hospital, now resided in an apartment nearby, close enough for frequent visits but with ample space for her own independence. As Brandon packed his leather briefcase for a last-minute board meeting, Melissa noticed the slight tremor in his hands. "Nervous?" she asked gently, recalling how the next agenda involved unveiling the company's plan to reduce the cost of yet another critical medication. He paused, scanning her face. "Somewhat," he admitted. "Every new push for affordability raises questions about our bottom line. Investors remain split, and Victor hasn't vanished from the picture. He still has allies who think I'm sacrificing profits for ideals." Melissa's heart clenched at the mention of Victor. After losing the vote, he'd retreated from the spotlight, but still hovered on the periphery, occasionally voicing public skepticism about Thornton Pharmaceuticals' direction. "You've come this far," she murmured, placing a reassuring hand on Brandon's forearm. "You've proven the business won't collapse just by being more compassionate." He nodded, exhaling slowly. "I'll stand my ground, but it's tiring sometimes." A soft sound at the doorway drew their attention. Nathan, wheeling himself quietly into the room, offered a tired smile. "I heard you talking," he said. "Dad, I know you'll figure it out, and if not, well, we can just show them the graphs again, and the patient's stories." His voice carried a playful confidence that belied the seriousness of corporate boardrooms. Brandon tousled his son's hair, and Nathan laughed. Moments like this reminded Melissa how far both father and son had journeyed. Brandon letting down his guard to truly parent. Nathan evolving into a self-assured teen who now had a real voice in his own life. She could hardly remember the reserved, withdrawn child he'd been when they first met. A few hours later, Melissa drove across town to see Eleanor, determined to squeeze in a quick visit before her afternoon lab. In the modest but cozy apartment, she found her grandmother sipping tea and reading a well-worn novel. Their eyes met, and warmth flooded Melissa's chest. Without hospital machinery crowding every corner, Eleanor looked years younger, her cheeks carrying a healthy glow. They chatted about everyday matters, Melissa's upcoming midterms, Nathan's progress, and the continued rollout of Thornton's patient assistance programs. At one point, Eleanor reached over to pat Melissa's hand. "I kept thinking," she said softly, "that my illness destroyed your dreams, but seeing you return to school, forging a path for yourself, while still caring for me and Nathan, it's more than I ever hoped for." Melissa swallowed the knot in her throat. "I'm only able to do it because I'm not alone," she replied. "Brandon's been supportive, and so have you. And Robert, Taylor, James, so many people have helped. I realized life doesn't have to be one big sacrifice if the right people stand by you." Eleanor smiled, eyes shining with pride. "Good," she said simply. "Embrace it." That evening, as Melissa returned to the penthouse, she found Nathan in the kitchen, flipping through a recipe book while Margaret supervised. He glanced up and grinned. "We're attempting a family dinner," he announced, "but I need to figure out these measurements." Margaret chuckled. "He's ambitious, that's for sure." Sensing the joy in the air, Melissa offered to help measure ingredients. Soon, the three of them were laughing over spilled flour, with the tantalizing aroma of a simmering sauce filling the kitchen. As daylight faded into the hush of evening, Brandon arrived from his board meeting, sporting a weary but triumphant expression. "We got approval," he declared, voice thick with relief. "The next wave of price reductions goes live next quarter. It was a fight, but we held strong." Nathan lifted a measuring spoon in celebration. "Dad, that's amazing." Melissa, face flush with excitement, approached Brandon, searching his eyes. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. The unspoken understanding between them seemed to eclipse any lingering doubts. As they settled down to their makeshift dinner, plates filled with the food Nathan had helped cook, conversation flowed freely. Talk of classes, therapy, and corporate changes mingled with teasing banter and genuine gratitude. Beneath the gentle glow of the chandelier, their vulnerabilities felt safer, their strengths amplified by unity. While challenges remained, the vestiges of Victor's influence, the tug of custody concerns, and the unpredictability of running a major pharmaceutical firm, this moment encapsulated a profound truth. They had formed a life together, imperfect yet hopeful, woven from compassion, resilience, and a shared resolve to do better each day. Melissa shifted uncomfortably in the corner booth of Bellamy's, the upscale restaurant where her life had changed so drastically. She still worked the occasional weekend shift to maintain a link to the world she once knew, an echo of the struggles that shaped her resilience. Tonight, she was off the clock but had come by invitation of her friend Sophia, who insisted on celebrating Melissa's latest academic milestone, finishing a grueling set of exams with top marks. Overhead, soft jazz music melded with the hushed murmurs of well-heeled clientele. The aroma of seared steak and rosemary drifted through the space, evoking memories of countless shifts, balancing trays, and fending off exhaustion. But this time, Melissa wore a simple navy dress instead of a server's uniform, a subtle symbol of the changes in her life. Sophia slid into the booth opposite Melissa, eyes sparkling. "You look good on that side of the table," she teased, raising a glass of sparkling water in a mock toast. "Here's to your bright future as doctor." "Walker, whenever that day comes," Melissa laughed, cheeks warming. "I still have a long road, but thanks for cheering me on." She sipped her water, letting her gaze wander. Patricia, the manager who once guarded Bellamy's strict standards, nodded politely from behind the host stand. It felt surreal to be on the receiving end of service in a place she once navigated with practiced efficiency. Midway through their conversation, the restaurant doors opened. Brandon and Nathan emerged, scanning the room until they spotted Melissa. She beckoned them over, heart fluttering at the sight. Nathan maneuvered his wheelchair with a confident ease that never failed to make Melissa smile. Brandon approached, an unmistakable warmth in his expression. "Hope we're not intruding," Brandon said, though his tone suggested he was quite pleased to be here. Sophia grinned. "Not at all." "Join the celebration." She vacated her seat, insisting that Nathan take her spot to ensure better access to the table. As they settled in, Sophia discreetly slipped away to give them a moment of family-like intimacy. Nathan leaned toward Melissa. "Dad told me you aced your exams," he said, eyes shining with pride. "Congrats, Miss Future Doctor." Melissa beamed. "Thank you. I couldn't have done it without everyone's support." "Especially yours, cooking dinner and letting me study in peace." Brandon tilted his head, a playful twinkle in his eyes. "Don't forget about my stellar coffee-making skills," he quipped. She laughed softly, recalling the nights he'd brought her steaming mugs to keep her awake during her frantic study sessions. Their conversation flowed easily, punctuated by glances from nearby tables. Some patrons recognized Brandon as the CEO who had steered Thornton Pharmaceuticals through tumultuous reforms. Others simply noticed the warmth among these three, as though they were a tight-knit family. Melissa no longer felt the old pang of inferiority she once experienced, serving elite customers. She saw them as individuals, navigating their own paths, just as she was. At some point, Robert Fletcher, now a consultant for Thornton's newly formed ethics committee, entered Bellamy's. Spotting the group, he ambled over with a friendly wave. "Should have known I'd find you here," he teased, eyes darting from Nathan's grin to Brandon's proud stance. "How's everyone holding up?" Brandon answered. "We're good. Corporate life is stabilizing. The board is still wary about some upcoming proposals, but we're forging ahead. I'm confident we'll see more changes for the better." Robert nodded approvingly. "Excellent. And you, Melissa, how's the juggling act between classes and caregiving?" "Honestly, it's tough," she admitted, "but fulfilling. I'm finding my rhythm." Robert patted her shoulder. "You've always had a gift for healing, whether in a hospital or over a restaurant table. Don't ever doubt it." After Robert departed, Nathan carefully cut into a dish of herb-roasted chicken, mindful of the new skills he'd developed to handle utensils. Watching him, Melissa recalled their very first meeting, how she'd helped feed him, oblivious that a simple act of kindness would set so many wheels in motion. She caught Brandon's eye across the table, and for a moment they shared a silent acknowledgement of how far they'd all come. A melodic piano tune shifted in the background, drawing the dinner crowd into a cozy hum. Outside the large windows, evening lights glowed along Chicago's avenues, the city pulsating with life. Melissa realized she occupied two worlds now: the humble, hard-working environment she knew for years, and this realm of privilege and opportunity Brandon inhabited. Yet here, in this moment, both worlds merged seamlessly. As they finished their meal, Sophia reappeared with a small cake adorned with a single candle. "For you," she whispered to Melissa, winking. "A toast to balancing so many roles and still shining." Brandon and Nathan clapped softly as Melissa blew out the candle, cheeks flushed with contentment. She made a silent wish, not for riches or instant success, but for the ongoing courage to keep bridging these two worlds. She wanted a life where compassion, determination, and love shaped every decision she made, be it in a restaurant booth or a corporate boardroom. And from the smiles around her, she suspected that wish was already, in many ways, coming true. A few short weeks later, Thornton Pharmaceuticals held a formal gathering to celebrate the opening of a new wing in its main research facility, one dedicated to studying rare diseases often overlooked by bigger profits. The decision had been championed by James Wilson and backed wholeheartedly by Brandon, who saw it as a chance to prove the company's evolving commitment to healthcare beyond the bottom line. The unveiling ceremony took place in a spacious atrium with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. Doctors in white coats mingled with corporate staff in tailored suits. Among them were patient advocates, university researchers, and even a few politicians curious about this pioneering public-private partnership. Soft classical music played, lending the event a hopeful yet dignified air. Melissa arrived with Nathan, guiding his wheelchair through the small crowd, while Brandon and James stood near a podium up front, greeting attendees. She noticed the subtle shift in the atmosphere, where once these gatherings exuded an air of sterile corporate pride, now there was genuine warmth. People spoke not just of quarterly earnings, but of life-saving trials, improved patient outcomes, and breakthroughs on the horizon. A screen displayed photos of individuals afflicted by rare conditions, along with stories of how new research could finally offer them a lifeline. Melissa felt her chest tighten at the sight of an older woman whose eyes shone with the same desperate hope she'd once seen in Eleanor. Standing by Nathan, she thought of all the families who might be spared the helplessness she and her grandmother had endured. When Brandon took the podium, the crowd hushed. He began by recounting Thornton Pharmaceuticals' history, its meteoric rise, its dark era of spiraling costs, and finally, its renewed vision. He emphasized the collective effort, from James's ethical framework to Melissa's unwavering advocacy, from Nathan's personal inspiration to the board members who believed in transformation. As the speech concluded, thunderous applause filled the atrium, some attendees even wiping away tears. James then introduced Robert Fletcher, who now served as an external advisor on medical ethics. A hush fell as Robert approached the microphone. "In my previous life as a doctor," he said, voice resonating with calm authority, "I witnessed firsthand how corporate policies shape patients' lives. When I met Melissa Walker in a restaurant kitchen, I never imagined I'd stand here one day, endorsing a pharmaceutical giant's commitment to affordability and research, but that's the power of empathy and persistence." Melissa found her eyes brimming with tears. She recalled the many nights she and Robert had commiserated over the system's failings, never quite daring to believe they could spark genuine change from within. Yet here they were, living proof that progress, even if slow and fraught, was possible. After the speeches, the crowd dispersed into smaller groups. Brandon excused himself to confer with a few prominent researchers, while Nathan explored interactive displays about cutting-edge treatments. Melissa wandered toward a cluster of patient advocates, curious to hear their stories. A middle-aged woman with earnest eyes and a pamphlet in hand approached her. "Are you Melissa Walker?" she asked softly. "I recognize you from the press coverage of the new assistance program." Melissa nodded, feeling both shy and honored. "Yes, I've been working with Thornton on some of these reforms. I'm also studying part-time in the medical field." The woman smiled. "My daughter has a rare autoimmune condition. She's finally getting medication through your assistance program. We were drowning in debt before this. I just wanted to say thank you." Overwhelmed, Melissa reached out to hug her, not caring that it defied the usual formality of corporate events. "I'm so glad it's helping," she whispered, voice thick with emotion. Before long, Nathan wheeled up, excitedly tugging at Melissa's sleeve. "You have to see this interactive booth. It's all about innovations in mobility aids," he exclaimed. She followed him, heart still pounding from the woman's gratitude. Each new face, each new story reaffirmed the importance of her role, not just as Nathan's caregiver or Brandon's confidant, but as a catalyst for empathy within an industry too often driven by numbers alone. Near the end of the event, Brandon found her in the midst of conversation, eyes gleaming with pride. Quietly, he slipped his arm around her waist in a gesture that still felt new, yet comforting. They watched James cut a ceremonial ribbon to cheers and camera flashes, and across the room, Robert offered them a discreet thumbs up. In that triumphant moment, Melissa realized they were building a lasting legacy, one that went beyond the immediate changes in pricing. It encompassed new research paths, ethical standards, and a deeper cultural shift within the corporate sphere, an inheritance that Nathan and future generations could refine and expand. Standing there, she felt the hush of a promise kept, a vow sealed by compassion and unwavering determination. 3 years later, the warm glow of summer cascaded across Chicago, painting the skyline in soft gold. Standing at the entrance of Bellamy's, now sporting a remodeled facade that blended classic elegance with updated charm, Melissa couldn't help smiling at how life had come full circle. She was dressed in a white coat, embroidered with her name, M. Walker, MD student, having just wrapped up a volunteer clinic shift. The swirl of old and new struck her as surreal. Inside the restaurant, Brandon waited with Nathan and Eleanor, who, at 85, looked healthier than she had in a decade. Robert Fletcher joined them, alongside a few other dear friends, for a small celebration. The staff greeted Melissa like family, ushering her to the table they'd reserved near a grand window overlooking the bustling street. Nathan beamed at her from his wheelchair, which he now navigated with casual ease. "You made it!" he exclaimed. "Dad was just telling us about a new partnership with a European research institute." Brandon nodded, pride shining in his eyes. "Thornton Pharmaceuticals continues to expand patient assistance globally, building on the blueprint James and I developed with you, Melissa. We're finalizing deals that will make crucial therapies accessible in underserved regions." Eleanor looked on, her smile as warm as the sun itself. "Makes me so happy to witness all of this," she said gently. "To think we started out just praying for one dose of medication, and now look at how many lives have been changed." A wave of emotion swept over Melissa. The transformation she saw in Brandon and Nathan, the breakthroughs in corporate ethics, and her own journey back to medicine. It all felt like a tapestry woven from hope, determination, and countless small acts of kindness. Settling into her seat, she recalled the moment she first noticed Nathan struggling to eat at this very restaurant. That simple impulse to help had ignited a chain of events none of them could have predicted. As they enjoyed a specially prepared meal, courtesy of Daniel, the temperamental but talented chef, who now occasionally joked about how Melissa had traded her tray for a stethoscope, laughter and conversation flowed freely. Robert teased Brandon about his first attempts at fatherhood, while Nathan recounted a recent adaptive sports competition he'd participated in. Sophia stopped by the table, offering hugs and quips about the old days. Midway through the meal, Brandon stood. The table quieted, curious about his sudden seriousness. He cleared his throat, eyes scanning the group. "I want to propose a toast," he began, raising a glass of sparkling cider, "to the incredible journey we've shared. A journey that started in heartbreak, challenges and injustices, but led us here, to Melissa, who taught me that empathy is the greatest currency any leader can possess, and to Nathan, my anchor, whose spirit has guided every decision I've made since I learned what truly matters." Tears pricked Melissa's eyes. She saw them mirrored in Eleanor's and even in Robert's. Nathan's gaze glistened with emotion. Brandon took a breath, his tone growing more tender. "Life felt hollow when I believed success meant ruthless ambition. Now I know it's about integrity, love, and the willingness to fight for others, even if it risks some of your own comfort." He set his glass down and, to Melissa's astonishment, turned toward her, producing a small velvet box from his suit pocket. The sight sent her heart pounding in her chest, her breath catching. Brandon's voice wavered for the first time she could remember. "Melissa Walker," he said softly, "I've spent years building a company, forging deals and chasing numbers, but the most meaningful thing I've ever built is this family, our family. Will you marry me?" A hush fell over the table. Eleanor pressed her hand to her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. Robert grinned, his eyes shining, while Nathan let out a delighted gasp, almost dropping his fork in excitement. Melissa's mind whirled with the history they shared, the heartbreak, the healing, the countless nights facing hospital hallways and boardroom battles. The memory of that very first moment she'd stepped forward to help Nathan cut his food came rushing back, filling her with an overwhelming sense of gratitude and awe. "Yes," she whispered, voice trembling. Then stronger, "Yes, Brandon, absolutely yes." Applause and cheers erupted. Nathan clapped furiously, a wide grin splitting his face. Brandon slipped the ring onto Melissa's finger, a delicate band set with a single diamond, elegant and understated, like the journey they'd walked together. In the background, diners paused to watch, some wiping tears at the display of genuine emotion. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Melissa felt an all-encompassing joy well up from the depths of her soul, tears flowing freely as she embraced Brandon. She caught a glimpse of Eleanor dabbing her eyes, Robert and Sophia exchanging grins, and Nathan practically glowing with pride. In that instant, the hardships and anxieties dissolved, replaced by a radiant certainty that every step, every act of kindness, every moral stand had led them to this. As they all raised their glasses once more, Melissa inhaled deeply, taking in the scent of fine dining, the warmth of her chosen family, and the echo of that first quiet encounter years ago. Life had come full circle indeed, proving beyond doubt that sometimes a simple act of compassion could transform not just a single evening, but an entire destiny. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.